the folder was labeled "Interview with Paul Fink," and it included a cassette tape. And so Ed Garvey and a friend of his named Ed Hanlon, they learned, it was like Garvey's hiking buddy, they learned that Fink was still alive, and he was the last, this was in the 70s, and he was the last surviving person from the original ATC meeting in 1925. And so they thought, we'll go like interview him and do a piece for the ATC magazine. And so they go down to Jonesboro, where he was living, where he lived his whole life, and they interviewed him. And during that interview, he takes them into, he was a passionate taxidermist, and he takes them into his taxidermy shop and shows them some of his taxidermy, and then he hauls out a human skin.
Shut up.
Right, exactly. I had the same, actually, my reaction was not.
I've read so much about him and not this part.
Right.
Welcome to Backpacker Radio, presented by The Trek, brought to you by Topo Athletic. I am your co-host, Zach Badger Davis. Sitting to my right is...
I am Juliana Chauncey, a.k.a. Chaunce.
A few reminders. First one is, if you're listening to this the day this comes out, tomorrow we have our, call it monthly, quarterly, maybe annually, Denver area hiker meetup. That's going down in Golden, Colorado, just like a quarter mile here from Trek headquarters at the Golden Mill. That'll start at 5 p.m. I should fact check that. It's either 5 or 5:30. All of the details will be included in the URL. But yeah, if you're listening to this the day it comes out and you want to mingle with some fellow stinky hikers, you can do so at the Golden Mill, April 14th. Hope to see you there. Next is if you're taking on a long-distance trek in 2026. I know we're a little bit late in the season, but it could be a southbound hike. It could be a late-season shorter thru-hike. Doesn't really matter. We'd love for you to apply to be a trek blogger. Many, many perks, which we've been over several times here, so I won't belabor that. But the link to apply is also in the show notes. And last but not least is if you enjoy this podcast and you want to support your favorite Cinnamon Connection, you can do so. Patreon.com/backpackerradio for as little as $5 per month. You get every episode advertisement free. Also,
you get to support the show that you love the most. It is really great to have you guys on Patreon and helping us out keep the lights on. I know on the video, if you're watching us on YouTube, hi internet, you see me and Zach all the time, but what you don't see is we have a lovely team of people behind the scenes that do help us put together every episode from start to finish, and we like to pay them well. And so in order to do that, we need, funds to do so, and it's nice to not be completely dependent on advertisers, and that is why we love Patreon so much, as well as the people that support us there. So if you would like to go there, do so on a desktop browser, because sometimes there might be an upcharge if you go through a specific app that is through a company that is like a fruit but not an orange or a banana. And so, yeah, we would love to have you there, and your support means a lot to us.
Yes. Patreon.com/backpackerradio. And we teased this at the end of last episode if you made it that far, but
yep.
If you're a Patreon supporter and local, send us a DM and we'll hook you up with some sparkling element water.
Yes, this is the easiest contest to win. You only need two things to win. A Patreon support arrangement with us.
Arrangement. Sounds scandalous.
And the ability to come pick up this yourself because it's too heavy for us to mail. But it's element and it's sparkling waters with their lovely electrolytes in them, and they taste delicious. They just are really, really generous, and I can't drink that much. I never thought I'd say that sentence, but yeah, sometimes you got to put a limit. So yeah, help us.
An element limit. If you guys need more or less audio in your headphones at any point, let me know. We got some new tools here. Still figuring it out. I was sounding loud to myself. I don't know if you guys felt the same way.
When you sweat, you lose a lot more than water. You're burning through sodium, potassium, magnesium, all the stuff your body needs to keep going strong on trail, thinking clearly, and sleeping well at night. That's why I'm a huge fan of Element. It's a zero sugar electrolyte mix with a science-backed ratio that's heavy on sodium, which is exactly what thru-hikers and long-distance backpackers are losing all day long. No sugar, no junk, just what your body actually needs. When I'm backpacking, I'll usually drink one Element throughout the day and then have another packet before bed. It helps me rehydrate, keeps the leg cramps away, and I'll wake up feeling like $1,000,000. Another underrated benefit, Element makes those dodgy water sources actually taste good. If you've ever filtered from a silty creek, a cow tank, or some lukewarm pipe coming out of the ground, you know how clutch that is. It's not just an on-trail thing either. Element is my go-to hangover prevention tool. One packet before bed, another in the morning, and you wake up hitting the erase button on a night of bad decisions. My favorites are lemonade, raspberry, and citrus. A cold element lemonade on a hot day tastes like absolute heaven. And the citrus works shockingly well as a no-calorie mix-in for a backcountry margarita, perfect while car camping, or the lazy version at home. Good news, Backpacker Radio listeners can score a free Element sample pack with any drink mix purchase by going to drinklmnt.com/thetrek. That sample pack includes citrus salt, raspberry salt, watermelon salt, and orange salt. 2 stick packs of each flavor, 8 total. No coupon code needed. Just use the URL. Again, that's drinklmnt.com/thetrek to get 8 free packets with any drink mix purchase. The deal is only available for a limited time.
Okay, let us get right to today's main event. This is an interview with Mills Kelly, who is a historian, podcaster, hiker, and backpacker, photographer, author, and educator. Mills taught at George Mason University for 24 years, maintains one of the most historic shelters on the AT, and serves as the Potomac AT Appalachian Trail Club. I was going to go with the abbreviation mid-sentence there, which was a bad choice, as well as the Appalachian Trail Museum. Most recently, Mills published his new book, A Hiker's History of the Appalachian Trail, which covers the trail over 100 years of history from the hiker's perspectives. Mills, thank you so much for joining us here on Backpacker Radio.
Hey, thanks so much, guys. It's a real thrill to be here. I've been a fan for, since the beginning.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Mills, do you have a trail name?
I do.
What is that?
I am Granddaddy Spartan.
Granddaddy Spartan? Give us the origin.
So the origin story, like so many great trail names, is that it was given to me. I was on a 2-week section hike, and my older son joined me for the last 4 days, and he's 6'5", and at the time was 16 or 17, and so full of energy, and I was nearing the end of my energy. And you know, if you're a section hiker like me, you know, you just start getting your trail legs after about 2 weeks. And so I hadn't gotten mine yet. And I was beat. And the movie 300 had come out that year. And so everybody's thinking about Sparta. And when my beard comes in, since I was, 35, it comes in pure white. So I'd been hiking like all day with this gazelle. And we get to one of the southern shelters in Shenandoah National Park. And I just wanted it to be hiker midnight, and I'm leaning against the shelter, just like, and ready to go to bed. And he's chatting with some thru hikers, and one of them looks at me and he says, "Dude, you look just like Granddaddy Spartan." And my son says, "He did need a trail name." So there it is. Name.
Love that.
There it is.
Love that. So many directions to go in. Chance, I know you are the AT history nerd here, so I'm going to let you do a lot of the steering, and I'll come from the perspective of a person who doesn't know much history about anything. It's not my forte, so I'll be able to relay questions for the common man.
Shall I steer the ship?
Take it.
All right. Well, here I am at the helm. That's right. That's where the helm is, right?
Yes.
More of a history buff than a boat person.
Yeah, I don't like oceans.
You're a hiker, not a sailor.
Yeah, I don't belong near big bodies of water.
Sailor, really?
Okay. So I have just read your new book, and it was great. I took a couple notes on the things that stood out, I think, for this interview. And one of the things early on in the book that was interesting to me is for all that you know about the AT and all, like, the pots that you've had stirred and had been in with Appalachian Trail stuff, I had just assumed you were a thru hiker, but that seems to not be the case. And not only that, but it seems like you're also a great advocate for section hiking. However, that wasn't always the case. You wrote a college application essay on how you would hike the whole AT, and then you ended up not doing it. Can you kind of talk through the process of getting the idea to do the hike, committing as much as Zach likes to say, put it in writing, tell people about it, as much as putting it in a college application, and then the emotions around that not coming to fruition the way that you had thought it would?
Yeah. I mean, so my connection to thru hiking is a really old one, because the first person to publish a book about thru hiking, not the first thru hiker, but the first person to publish a book about thru hiking was a guy named Ed Garvey, and he wrote Appalachian Hiker Adventure of a Lifetime in 1971, I think. And I was a brand new Boy Scout in those days, and my scoutmaster, Mr. Ballard, I have no idea what his first name was. It was Mr. He was a Marine, and he believed, stationed at the Pentagon, and he believed that all Boy Scouts should go backpacking, regardless of the weather, regardless of how tired they were or anything. So the only thing that ever stopped us was ice. But we hiked on this trail in Shenandoah National Park that was called the Appalachian Trail. Mr. Ballard was from California. If he knew that this trail was 2,000 miles plus long, he never mentioned it. And then Garvey publishes this book, and he lived right around the corner from where our Boy Scout troop met. And so when the book comes out, he comes and gives a talk and a slideshow, you know, the actual slides, because it was 1971. And I just remember sitting there thinking, holy shit, this trail goes all the way to Georgia where my grandparents live, and all the way to Maine, which for me was like a vague concept when I was 12. And so the next time I went to the trail, I stood at one of those concrete markers in Shenandoah, and I remember looking north and thinking, wow, that's a long way. It's more than 1,000 miles. And my grandparents are like almost 1,000 miles that way. And I'm going to do this. I was totally inspired. And so I had this, like through my teen years, I had this idea that that's what I was going to do. And so, as you said, in my college application essays I wrote, when I graduate from college, I'm going to do something really impossible. I'm going to hike the Appalachian Trail from one end to the other. And then I got a job, and then I got married, and then we moved around a lot. Didn't live in the D.C. area. Didn't live on the East Coast for a while. Lived in Texas for a while. Then we had kids, although I made my kids start hiking on the trail when they were 4 and 2. And their first hike was, like half a mile or something like that. But so just like life took over. So I kept hiking on the trail, but I just couldn't ever carve out that 4 months, 5 months, 6 months to do it. And so then, Chauncey, you asked about the emotional side. And I remember right after college, I was a bar manager. And I went out for the weekend. And, I went out for like Tuesday, Wednesday, because I worked on the weekends. And I was up on the trail. I think I was just south of Shenandoah. And I thought, I'm not going to do this. Not now. Like, I'm going to do it, just not now. And then over the years, I've had that realization again and again. Like, this is happening in my life, so I'm not going to do it.
Is it sadness and regret, or is it acceptance? Is it a newfound appreciation for the sections at a time? What are those feelings?
I think it's both of those last two. I was actually, before I came out here, I was looking through, I'm one of those guys who I carry little notebooks and I write about my hikes. And I remember I was in Vermont, and I hiked the section just south of the intersection with the northern part of the Long Trail. And so I don't know, I did like 10, 12 miles, and the weather was horrible. It was classic Vermont, downpour, black flies. It was awful. And I remember thinking, I love this trail. It's so awesome. And I'm okay now with the fact that I'm a section hiker. That was 10 years ago, maybe. And so I sort of accepted the trail for what it is, and I learned to appreciate the opportunity to spend time in all these different sections. What I don't appreciate is how hard it is to be a section hiker. Because, thru hiking is incredibly difficult, but section hiking has its own difficulties. For sure. Like we were saying, you never quite get your trail legs. Yeah. I think the longest stretch I've ever done is 20 days.
Yeah.
And so I can remember thinking like, ooh, these are trail legs. Yeah. I've heard about these.
Yeah. Time to get off.
Right. Oh, and I got to go home in 4 days. You know.
Yeah.
So it's section hiking is difficult in its own way. But then as I started working on the books, I realized I think like a lot of people, I thought that the trail was designed to be a long distance hiking trail, not a long hiking trail that people would hike on. And I came to understand that it was never intended to be a long distance hiking trail. And, when Earl Shafer did it in the first thru hike in 48, the people at the ATC said, no, you didn't. No, why would you do that? That's dumb. That's ridiculous. They called it a stunt. And so, and it's morphed into this thing, and it has inspired so many other long distance trails. And because I guess the work on the PCT started in the 40s, and I think they finished it up around 1950. I'm not a PCT historian, so don't hold me to that. But so it kind of came a little bit later. But and long distance hiking, not just thru hiking, but like really long distance hiking, people hiking, the John Muir Trail or whatever, the Arizona Trail that we were talking about earlier. It's just become this big thing, which, I don't have to tell you guys because it's what you do. But Yeah, it's, I've come to accept that I am a section hiker, and I love the trail for all those pieces that I get to see. And, one of the real upsides is I get to pick the pieces I want to hike.
And when to hike them.
So, for instance, I skipped the cornfields of Pennsylvania, in the Carlisle Valley. I hiked north from Pine Grove Furnace, had a shuttle driver pick me up and drive me around because, I don't care.
Yeah.
So.
So which sections do you have remaining?
So I have a lot remaining. So, I'm only maybe 750 miles into the trail.
Okay.
And so from the Potomac River, I'm north and south a long way. And I have one very long section. So I guess from Dragon's Tooth to the Susquehanna. So that's 400 miles maybe.
Yeah.
And then I've just got bits and pieces all up and down the trail. The only state that I haven't, no, that's not true. The only two states I haven't hiked any of the trail in are Connecticut and Maine.
How do you go about picking what section you'll do?
So a lot of it was driven by the research for my books, and because I had to go to the Trail Club archives, and so then if I was going to go to the Green Mountain Club archives, I would say, okay, well, where do I want to hike in Vermont? And I went to the AMC archives. So where do I want to hike in the Whites? And so I would pick places that I'd read about in my research, or friends had told me that they just really enjoyed.
It's nice that you've got Maine remaining. That's a
Yeah.
fun one to bite off.
Yeah.
Do you have
I
a
know.
timeline for that?
So I am retired, as you mentioned. I taught for 24 years there, plus a bunch of other years before that. So now I have more time. And so I'm thinking, 26 is not the year. I have this debate with my orthopedist about whether I should get a new hip first or later. And because I've got a wonky hip, and, this happens when you get older. And so he and I are going to have another conversation about that, about whether I do a nice long stretch in 27 or 28. But my first goal actually is to start at Dragon's Tooth and hike on down to Springer.
Okay.
And that's, I don't know, 500, 400 miles, something like that, 450, I think. And because then I will have the whole southern half. And, there's this thing about piecing things together. You have, I don't know, I think a lot of section hikers do this. We have the map of the trail and the highlighter. We're highlighting the sections, and then you start saying oh, well, if I just did 42 miles here, then I'd have this longer piece. So
yeah,
I could see that being a fun game.
Yeah, it is a fun game.
Yeah. Before I move along too far chronologically, there's a couple of things that I want to touch on a little more from the early days. First, as you mentioned, Ed Garvey living around the corner from where the scout troop met. Who is, for the listeners, Ed Garvey, and what's his significance? Why is that so cool?
Yeah, so Garvey was a really important figure in the history of the trail. Not only was he the first person to publish a book about a thru-hike, but then a lot of people will say that book motivated the boom in thru-hiking on the AT, because people read it. People like me read it and said, I could do that. I mean, if this old, because he had retired from the government and then done this hike. This old guy could do it. I could do it. And it got to be. But if you read the book, he was also kind of a grumpy hiker. He was a long-time PATC and ATC volunteer and leader, and he was I think he was supervisor of trails for PATC for a little bit, and he thought he was going to be the chairman of ATC at one point. The vote didn't go his way, and I think he was not necessarily the most likable guy, and so somebody else was Ruth Blackburn, who the Blackburn Trail Center is named for, was chosen over him, and he kind of quit in a huff for a while. But the book, he gets grumpier as he goes up the trail about how the trail clubs are not maintaining the trail the way they're supposed to, and there's so much litter, because in the 70s there was a ton of litter. There are photos in the book of these mounds of trash around the shelters, and it was before Leave No Trace. And so people start, when you read in the shelter logs, as I did to write the second book, I read, I don't know how many, the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of shelter log entries. Some hikers in the mid-70s start talking about doing a Garvey or an anti-Garvey, because he got mad at people for cutting switchbacks. And so they would cut switchbacks just to be the anti-Garvey, stuff like that. And I mean, they're actually writing about it. And other people would write, I don't believe Ed Garvey exists. And, I haven't seen his name in the shelter logs anywhere, stuff like that.
So he was Chuck Norris?
Sort of like that. So he was, and then on the flip side, he loved thru hikers. He really did. And he would, toward the end of his life, he would, we didn't call it trail magic in the 70s, but he was an early adopter of the idea of trail magic. He would just like show up in, some picnic ground along the Blue Ridge Parkway and do a hiker feed. And when that wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he was a really interesting guy.
Did you ever meet him?
Just that one time at my scout troop when I was, a kid. So
was he discernibly grumpy?
No, because he was like showing off for the scouts.
Okay,
that day.
he could put it on.
Yeah.
There was another thing right around that area where you had talked about the gear and like the gear that you had from the Navy surplus store, getting ready for the trail that you were doing. Can you talk to us about what the backpacking gear was like in the early 70s?
So, I'm so fascinated I love reading all the, the posts on Facebook, for instance, leading up to the, to February, March. And there are all these sort of people who are not experienced hikers, and they're like, should I bring this? Should I bring that? Should I invest in this? Should I invest in that? And so there's all this gear talk that goes on. And, back in the day, the hikers carried stuff that was just impossible to imagine. And like I have a photo of a Trapper Nelson backpack, which was a really popular backpack before the Second World War. And it's basically two pieces of like 2x2 with some metal struts holding them together, and a couple of canvas pads to like stretched across the back to keep the metal struts off your back.
So it's 12 pounds by itself.
It was like 9, I think. And so and no hip belt, because that idea came in like the early 70s.
Yeah.
And so somebody that's Mr. Nelson with his daughter in the backpack in the picture. And
I mean, he looks to be carrying her comfortably. At least it's
so a friend of mine down in Floyd, Virginia, gave me, her husband had one of those, and she gave it to me, and I put it on, and I was like, okay, this is not bad. Feels okay. And then I put some weight in it, and I thought, oh my God, how does anybody do this? I mean, those struts were like pressing on my spine.
Yeah.
And so, and they used army packs. After the Second World War, like Earl Shafer used what they called a jungle pack from is the kind of pack he carried across the Pacific when he was a soldier in the war. And those were, canvas and metal, and they probably weighed 5 or 6 pounds. And, and the tents were all canvas until the Second World War. And if they got wet, then you had the weight of the canvas plus the weight of the water. And so, backpackers were carrying 40, 50 pounds because they were also carrying fresh food. That's the other thing, like onions and apples and stuff like that. So, it was nothing for hikers to carry 3 pounds of food per person per day.
Wow.
I guess we'll jumping ahead and at least my typed up stuff quickly. Since you mentioned onions, can you tell us about onion sandwiches?
Yeah, this is a question I was at the the Georgia ATC there used to be the AT Kickoff Festival, now it's AT Gateways. I guess this year they rebranded it, and so I had about 40 people in the room, and I said, so how many of you had an onion sandwich before? Have you ever had an onion sandwich? Just like 2 slices of bread with some butter and a big slab of onion in between.
Raw onion?
Raw onion, yeah.
No.
That was really common hiker food before the Second World War, really up through the 50s.
That can't be good.
So it turns out that in the South, a number of people say, oh, my grandma used to eat those. So I guess it was popular, but
you've tried one for research.
I
haven't
tried
you?
one for research. I kept reading about them, and so I thought, okay, I got to be a good researcher. So I made one, and I took one bite.
Is it as bad as I imagined?
That was enough. One was enough.
Yeah.
And I was using a
matter?
Vidalia onion, so it was better, right?
Yeah.
But,
like a red onion would be impossible, I would imagine.
or just your good old-fashioned yellow onion.
Yeah.
Plus, you couldn't get near anybody for hours.
For sure. Maybe that's to your benefit if you're trying to go solo.
No vampire problems, but
Sure.
So yeah, so I mean, they used to eat stuff like that. It's my favorite food thing though.
Dynamite soup.
Dynamite soup, yeah. So I describe it in the book as when you're hiking and you get like a really small pebble in your shoe, and it's annoying, but it's not annoying enough that you're going to stop and take your shoe off. Dynamite soup was that pebble. I kept reading in advice literature about what to eat. People would refer to dynamite soup, and I tried everything to figure out what it was. The trail clubs used to publish cookbooks, and I looked on eBay because you can find advertisements for old products on eBay. I was looking for Dynamite soup. I couldn't find it. Finally, I was in the archives of the Smoky Mountain Club and in Knoxville. And Paul Fink, who is credited with, he has like a really dark history, but he was also credited with being one of the, he's really the person who convinced the ATC to route the trail through the Smokies and not to Mount Mitchell. And so we hiked through the Smokies today because of Fink. And he was writing in a letter to a friend that I was reading about some hike he'd been on, and he says, he refers to our principal meal was Dynamite soup, and it's made by taking a piece of Erbswurst, which was made by the Knorr company that we all know for their like cheesy noodles and stuff, but it was basically split pea soup in a tube. So you just like slice it up. It was developed by the Prussian army in the 1860s or something like that, and you just slice it up and throw it in the pot. And he said with whatever else you had laying around, like some onions or some rice or whatever. He said, and it was called Dynamite soup for its later explosive qualities. So the first AT food fart joke was right there. So.
And
Right
from
on
that
brand.
spurred Skyline Chili.
Right, exactly.
You mentioned Paul Fink. I went through and dug into some of your podcast episodes. This story is crazy. Will you share that?
Yeah. So, and it connects back to Ed Garvey in a way. So the longtime archivist of the ATC is a guy named Brian King. He was their archivist and publicist forever. And Brian, I couldn't have written anything without Brian's help. I mean, he was just so kind to me and so helpful. And the ATC archives used to be in this warehouse in West Virginia. And it looked like a tornado had gone through there. I mean, I had a pile of stuff fall on me one day, just like boxes of files, and it was just a total disaster. But Brian, he was so nice to me, and what I was interested in was I was writing a piece for the AT Journeys about race and the trail, and how that's changed over time. And so what I was looking for was how the clubs handled the advent of the Civil Rights Act. And because they're all private clubs, and so like what were they going to say about it? Because some of the southern clubs had Smoky Mountains Hiking Club was formally segregated. It was like in their constitution that membership was open to all white people of good character, which they dropped in the 60s. But I just wanted to know, like, how did they deal with this? And I couldn't find anything. There was just nothing there. And so I finally said and I'm a pretty good researcher, but I just couldn't find anything. And so I said something to Brian about it, and he said, oh, well, here's the thing you should look at. Archivists do this all the time. They know stuff's in their collection, and they'll say to a researcher, well, you might want to look at that. They're just like waiting for somebody to see it, And so the folder was labeled Interview with Paul Fink, and it included a cassette tape. And so Ed Garvey and a friend of his named Ed Hanlon, they learned, it was like Garvey's hiking buddy, they learned that Fink was still alive, and he was the last, this was in the 70s, and he was the last surviving person from the original ATC meeting in 1925. And so they thought, we'll go like interview him and do a piece for the ATC magazine, sort of like our oldest living alum kind of thing for your alumni magazine. And so they go down to Johnson City, or Jonesboro, where he was living, where he'd lived his whole life, and they interviewed him. And during that interview, he takes them into, he was a passionate taxidermist, and he takes them into his taxidermy shop and shows them some of his taxidermy, and then he hauls out a human skin.
Shut up.
Right, exactly. I had the same, actually, my reaction
I've
was
read
not...
so much about him and not this part.
Right. And so I just read it, and I'm sitting there. The desk I was sitting at was actually Benton MacKaye's old office desk, which is now in the museum. And I'm sitting there, and I'm reading this, and I had to read it 3 times. And I just looked at Brian, and I said, you gotta be shitting me. And he said something like, you can't make this up. And so he actually had 2. One of a black man, one of a white man, and it turns out that so then I had to like go down that horrible hellhole of research, and it turns out that he wasn't the only person who did this kind of thing, but but he was pretty proud of it, and so they wrote this essay about Fink, and they have this like throwaway paragraph toward the end of the essay, sort of like it was as much of a throwaway as if they'd said, and Paul was really proud of his taxidermy, and he showed us, this deer that he had recently stuffed, that kind of thing. And so the first problem is he had this trophy, basically. And then the second problem is that
get it?
Well, I learned that he wrote it somewhere that it came to him from a medical student who he knew. Medical students have access to human bodies for dissection purposes. So that's how he got it.
Okay. Second problem.
Yeah, but so it's a huge problem. And then the second problem is that Garvey and Hanlon thought that they would just include that in the essay. Like that was no big deal. Really? And so then they send him a draft of the essay with this included, and the cassette tape is a second interview they did with him where they were talking about the draft of the essay, and he, Fink, to his credit, actually was self-aware enough to say, you might want to take that part out because that might freak people out. He said his words were, I wouldn't want people to think that the trail was that one of the founders of the trail was a barbarian like me or something like that, And you can listen to it. It's in the podcast. I mean, we put his voice in there because you just can't make this stuff up.
Right.
And so, it's just incredibly shocking.
Totally.
Why would one have those? Like, what would
his
motivation?
There's a long history of what you would call trophy keeping from lynchings, and a woman named Harriet Washington wrote a book called Medical Apartheid, where she goes in. She was a longtime Washington Post reporter, and she goes into a lot of detail. So you can read for yourself.
If you're in the market for stylish, affordable shades that actually hold up on trail, listen up. Shady Rays is an independent sunglasses brand on a mission to make premium eyewear accessible to everyone. And they've got over 300,000 five-star reviews to back that up. Polarized lenses with super clear optics, durable frames, solid hinges, and clean classic styles that look sharp on and off trail. And my favorite part? Their Lost and Broken Protection Program. Drop them in a creek crossing, sit on them at camp, leave them in a hitch. They've got you covered from day one. Just reach out and they'll send you a new pair. No stress, no hassle. Finally, sunglasses you don't have to worry about babying on trail. Discount time. Backpacker Radio listeners, Shady Rays is offering you their best deal of the season. Head to shadyrays.com and use code TREK for 40% off 2 or more pairs of polarized sunglasses. That's 40% off 2 or more pairs at shadyrays.com. Code TREK, T-R-E-K. This deal is only good for a limited time, so don't wait.
But so Paul Fink has a very dark side.
Interesting. You wrote in the new book about hiking while, what did you title it? Hiking while other, which covers race in the trail a little more in depth. And I was kind of surprised reading it. I mean, you expect a certain amount of things that aren't cool when you're dealing with half of the trail being in the South where not cool things happened. But I was surprised reading about Irwin, Tennessee, because my creepy Irwin story that I always go to is Mary the Elephant.
Right.
And we've talked about that on here.
Yeah.
But you had, including Trailog excerpts, noted that someone had mentioned, what is it about a town that prides itself on having no black residents? And you talked a little bit about sundown towns and how Irwin, for a long time, that was a very big, proud point for them. Can you kind of talk about that sort of thing and what hikers are walking past on trail that they might not even know?
Yeah, I mean, so the short story about Irwin is that there was a lynching in Irwin, I guess it was, I can't remember which decade it was. I think I said it in the book, but I can't remember now. And when the lynching happened, the sheriff of Irwin called the entire black population of the town together. 1918. And called them together and said, "You're next." And so they did what anybody would do in that situation. They all moved. And so there have not, up from that moment forward, there were no black people in Irwin for a very, very long time. And so it became a sundown town. And, and the trail traverses, and it's not just in the South. I mean, there's sundown towns, in the north as well. And
Can you define a sundown town?
a place where black people should not be outdoors after sundown.
Okay.
And so it's I mean, I'll just say I had a shuttle driver picking me up in Pennsylvania, and
This is Duncannon, right?
Duncannon, and he asked me if I could just walk to the Arco station that's kind of on the edge of town there, and I said sure. And he was black, and I asked him, like, why didn't you want to? I was standing in front of the Doyle, why'd you want me to walk out there? And he said, I'm tired of people throwing things in my car. And
that wasn't that long ago, was
no,
it?
that was like 2019, I think.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So, I mean, race is a big problem in American society. We all know that, and the trail is not immune from that. And for hikers, it's really easy to go onto the trail and just sort of remove yourself from whatever's happening in the world, and that's part of the reason we do it, right? I mean, it's nice not to read the news for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, just to remove yourself. But that's also a privilege that we have as hikers to be removed. And it's especially a privilege to have as white hikers, because I give the example in the book of at the Monterey shelter, which I guess is Trey Mountain now, in the 80s, just reading the shelter logs, I'm just reading through, and in the 80s, it says in big bold letters across the top of one of the pages, all N-words will die here. So that's bad enough. And then what's worse is that nobody tore that page out.
You were saying even in your research, up until the 90s, it was really hard to find any sort of diversity amongst the hikers on trail, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, Robert Taylor's the first black male to thru-hike. There's a black woman who hiked with her white husband in the 80s. But
Lori Pierce.
Pardon?
Is that Lori Pierce?
Yeah, and so Robert Taylor, like, we don't know a lot about it, because then he went and hiked the PCT the next year. But he's, to my knowledge, he only ever did one interview with Outside Magazine, and it's like one page. So, and he talks a little bit about it in the interview. He said occasionally hikers would look at me like I was going to steal their gear, and he said, like any thru hiker wants more gear. I'm like, sure, I'm going to carry more weight. But he said the bigger problem was in towns. He would go into towns and people wouldn't, in one case, a mailman wouldn't give him his bounce box even though he could see it on the shelf.
Wow.
So, and that was 1996. So,
wow.
Have there been other aspects to that angle of research that have surprised you? Like the fact that you said in 2019 you had a first-hand encounter with something like that. Like, it's just so depressing.
Yeah. Well, it sort of, it sort of surprises me and sort of doesn't. I mean, I'm a historian. I know that, like, people are people, and there are lots of really good people in the world, and some that aren't.
Yeah.
And and my family's all rooted in the South, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, and my parents were really involved in the civil rights movement, and so it's a thing we talked about when I was growing up, and so none of this is really a surprise to me, I guess. Mm-hmm. The more positive surprise, to like turn from the dark to the light here, is that we tend to think, or I think a lot of people think of long distance backpacking as kind of a male coded activity. That's like, men are generally bigger, they have generally more upper body strength, and so it's kind of a male thing to do, and so the AT naturally was kind of a more male place, and that's just simply not true. And like some of the clubs had 50-50 rules because there were too many women. So they had to, you had, in the old days you had to apply to join a trail club, you couldn't just join. And so like the Georgia Club, the PATC were two that I know of that had 50-50 rules for a while because there were too many women. And you look at the photos, and the photos are just full of women. And so they were everywhere, and in backpacking and hiking, and trail maintaining, and leadership roles. And so it's.
And what year did you say that was implemented, the 50-50 rule?
So the PATC one was in the 30s, and I think the Georgia Club one was also maybe in the 30s, 40s, like that. I mean, backpacking and hiking have always been popular with women, and so it's just kind of a myth or an assumption that it's more of a male thing.
You didn't mention the year of the 50-50 in the book, but you did include a quote from Sarah Middlefelt.
Mm-hmm.
Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
and she's an author of
She wrote Tangled Roots.
Yeah. For many women from especially the upper classes, it was an opportunity for them to step out a little bit of traditional gender roles, but it was still socially acceptable for them to be part of these clubs. The clubs served as a social function, but also had opportunities for them to literally get out of the home and house and become more engaged in the community in different ways. Can you talk a little bit about the advent of clubs and how they served that purpose in breaking those gender roles, but just also in that time of vacationing and going out and finally exploring these mountains that used to be scary? Just what was the significance of them?
Yeah. So first of all, I'll say, the I think one of the coolest things about the AT is that it's the only national park that's maintained by volunteers. That's just cool, and it's strange. I don't think the National Park Service would do that again, although I think they're very happy with this arrangement. And in 2024, I lived in Germany for 6 months, and so there was a park nearby with a bunch of trails, and so I called the forest manager of the park, and I said, hey, I'd like to volunteer to help out on your trails, because I'm a trail maintainer, and that's what I do. And he said, well, why don't you come by? And I talked to him, and he said, so you want to volunteer? And I said, yeah, I want to volunteer. And he said, but why? Because he said, here in Germany, we don't volunteer. We pay people to do that. And I said, you do? Wow, we do it for free, just for the fun of getting dirty and like tearing out vines or moving rocks. He said, I want to know more about this. This is really interesting to me. And he would like watch me work, and he would say like, he's a volunteer. And so it was really fun. But and I just did standard trail maintenance stuff, and so that's, I think, one of the really wonderful things about the AT project from the beginning is, and this was part of Benton MacKaye's idea, was that it would be a volunteer project. He talked about volunteer labor being this great untapped pool of wealth in the United States. And so the clubs right from the start formed to start building the trail, and some of them had been around, like Carolina Mountain Club predated the trail, and AMC predated it by like 50 years, and so some of the clubs had been around already, but others like PATC or the Georgia Club or the like the Blue Mountain Eagle Club in Pennsylvania, they're all formed to build the trail and then maintain it, and right from the start they had this kind of egalitarian ethic that people should just come and help out, whether they're male or female. Further north you went, the easier it got if you were not white. And so it's just it was an opportunity, as Sarah said in this quotation that you read. It's an opportunity for women to start doing that sort of thing. But if you look at photos like from the Mazamas club out on the West Coast, there was a mountaineering club. There are these great photos of women in long dresses on the summits of peaks, 14,000 foot peaks with snow everywhere, and they've got their ice axes and their long dresses and big floppy hats, and so women had already been engaged in this kind of serious outdoor activity, but clubs gave them like a way to do that, an organizational structure for doing that, and people to do it with, either other women or men. I did an oral history for PATC. I did an oral history recently with a guy whose father was one of the founders of the club back in the 20s, and he said that he really liked, when he was a young man, he really liked going on the hikes because it was a way to meet women his own age who were interested in the things he was interested in, which was hiking, canoeing, rock climbing, whatever. And like the couple that maintains the priest shelter in Virginia, which anybody who's a thru-hiker knows the priest, they've been doing it forever. I don't know, 25 years, something like that. And they met on a canoe trip. And they both, I interviewed them for the podcast, and they both sort of said, well, if he hadn't been interested in the outdoors, I wouldn't have dated. There would never have been a second date. And he said the same thing about her. So it became this great way to meet like-minded people. And for women in a kind of safer and more controlled way.
That's cool.
And safer, and when I say safer, I mean like socially safer.
Right.
The Appalachian Trail's just never been a dangerous place. So.
I have a question that's going to completely derail us. So
Go
if you've
for
got,
it.
okay.
I wrote down my notes, so I've got the places that I've already gotten derailed from,
Yeah.
and I know where to get back to.
Yeah. This is not AT history, but it's so interesting. We have to talk about it. The Atlantic article, the course you teach or taught called Lying About the Past.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
So I've always, as an educator, I've always been a little bit of a bomb thrower, and when the internet came along, I was an early adopter, and had my students building websites back when they had to actually write the code themselves. It was before Netscape Composer came out, and which is long gone. So I had to teach them HTML to do it. First, I had to learn HTML, then I had to teach it to them, but I started noticing that students were just kind of grabbing anything off the internet and putting it in a paper and not assessing whether it was accurate or not. And so you get some real howlers in their papers. And you point it out to them, and they'd be like, "Oh, I'm embarrassed now." But being, like if you remember the old Charlie Brown cartoons, like the shows, the parents the adults were always this like wah, 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 voice in the background. And if you were an educator and you stood in front of a classroom and said, "Now, don't you use those internet sources," it was like, wah, wah. It's just the same sort of sound. Yeah. Nobody was paying any attention. And so it occurred to me that so that was one thing. And then the second thing was my students weren't having fun. They were enjoying my classes. I've always been a pretty popular teacher, but they weren't having fun. And I noticed that because I spent a day teaching a group of fourth graders, and they just had fun. They were laughing. They were down on the floor with their friends. They were just doing stuff. And I was like, wow, my students they don't have fun. So I was driving home from work one day, and it occurred to me that I could do something that would get them to be more critical about sources they found online and have fun. And that is, they would create a historical hoax, and they would turn it loose on the internet to see what happened.
The original trolls.
And that they would have to stop. We weren't going to create what historians like to call a zombie fact, that you just can't kill, no matter how hard you try. And so I had 17 students at first. I taught the course twice. The first time I had 17 students, and they were awesome. And we spent the first 3 weeks talking about what we couldn't do, what would be out of bounds. So, like, we couldn't do anything about healthcare because people depend on the internet for information, no matter how bad it might be. They depend on information about health to help guide them in their lives. So we couldn't do anything healthcare related. We couldn't do anything about the Civil War because there are too many people that know too much about the Civil War. You'd never fool them. And so, that kind of thing. And so they landed on, it was sort of like the Seinfeld show. They used to say it was a show about nothing. They said, okay, we're going to do a hoax about nothing, which is the last American pirate. Because pirates who doesn't like pirates,
We love pirates here at
everyone
Backpacker
loves
Radio.
pirates.
Right.
Yeah.
So who doesn't love pirates? And so they created Edward Owens, the last American pirate, and so they spun out this whole hoax, and after 2 weeks they cut it off. They didn't want to. They really wanted to. They wanted to let it run until it died of its own accord, but they cut it off. And
is that just as simple as just making a web page dedicated to this?
So they made a web page, but the web page was it was actually a student writing a blog about her research paper about Edward Owens.
Going a few layers deep.
Yeah, and so and what they learned was a really good hoax only works if you have a lot of true, as they said, true facts, which are wrapped around the false fact, the lie in the middle. And so if somebody actually starts poking at it a little bit, they look up, they actually check some of your sources. Oh, well, that's true. So it all must be true because we're lazy. We don't check all the sources. So but the lie was that there was no Edward Owens. And so, but they had all this other stuff that was true wrapped around that lie. And who they fooled, they really fooled two people. Mostly. One was a pop culture writer for USA Today. And she wrote a column in USA Today about this student doing this amazing work about and that somebody needed to get her an agent because this could be a movie,
It sounds like a Nathan For You bit. This is
yeah. So, and then the other person they fooled was a professor at a neighboring university who started commenting on the students' blog, like, I'm so impressed with the work that you do. And it was a little embarrassing to me because she was the wife of one of my colleagues. and so I actually had to call her and say, Sue,
Delete
it's
your
a
comments.
hoax. It's a hoax. I'm deleting your comments. But then so then the second semester, I taught the course again a couple years later, and we had 2 hoaxes, and because it was a bigger class, and then Yoni Applebaum, who wrote for the Atlantic for a long time, wrote history-focused things. He wrote this piece for the Atlantic, which for a long time was their most downloaded tech-focused story.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
That's quite the compliment.
But yeah, it was, and it was one of those, like, internet moments. For like 48 hours, I was getting calls from news media all over North America. And
what was this hoax?
And there were 2. One was a genealogist who had come to believe that her great uncle was Jack the Ripper, and who had moved from London to New York, and because Jack the Ripper just suddenly stopped murdering women in London, and this is true. And shortly after that, somebody started murdering prostitutes in New York, which is also true. And so this genealogist came to believe that, she found some letters in a trunk in the attic or something like that. And the other was, because it was 2012 and there was a lot of hoopla in Baltimore about the War of 1812 because the Star Spangled Banner and all that, it was a similar kind of thing. Somebody found some documents, and it was actually the original recipes for some beer brewed at a brewery in Baltimore in 1812. The Star Spangled Banner was actually the flag itself, which hangs in the Smithsonian, was sewn in that brewery. That's true. And so they found somebody working in the building found these old recipes, and so they were trying to hoax the microbrewers of Baltimore. That's
it's
what
just
they were
dynamite soup.
that didn't work. So anyway, they so there was this. So then Yoni wrote this story, and it briefly blew up. And the one thing I learned is the sort of useful thing that I learned is that if anybody ever threatens to kill you, because I got a death threat, it's the U.S. Marshals Service that handles that. So I had a long conversation with a nice guy from the U.S. Marshals Service. Somebody was so mad at me because my students had created a false Wikipedia entry that he's threatening to kill me.
What?
So how could you care that much about Wikipedia? That's my question.
It's someone who fully bought in and is mad about the wasted time.
So.
I'm curious just about how truth interfaces with history overall, and I'm sure this is a massive conversation. And like, the internet has made it bad, and then AI takes it into an entirely different direction.
Realm, right.
And social media obviously is probably the worst of them all. But I'm just curious, in terms of researching things, even having like a firsthand account of something, how do you evaluate information, the accuracy?
Okay, so I'll give you a really good example. I talked earlier about the Smoky Mountains Hiking Club had this document saying that membership was open to all white people of good character. Okay, that's kind of a shocking thing from the perspective of 2026. So you see it once, you say, okay, well, that's probably true because there it is. It's like a club document. But I want corroboration. I want a second document because it could be that somebody published that thing, stuck it in a folder. They wrote it and stuck it in a folder, but it wasn't actually the club policy. So I had to go in the archives and find the original constitution of the Smoky Mountains Hiking Club, and there it is. So now that I have corroborating evidence, I can say, okay, fine. The problem that people get into is that they see something and they don't do that fact-checking, and so they just see this, the first thing, and they say, oh, well, that must be true, because it sounds true.
Right.
So if you don't do the corroboration, then you get led around by the nose.
Yeah. And how does that change in the era of the internet? Because as you've learned and taught yourself, you can have a fake source, and then people are writing news articles in the USA Today about that. You've got corroborating sources that are just both happen to be built on a foundation of bullshit.
So for instance, in the case of that store, that the Last American Pirate, it was a blog written by a student, and there was a website that she created for her project. If anybody had actually looked underneath the hood of either the blog or the website, they would have seen that they were registered to Professor Mills Kelly, George Mason University Department of History with my email. not to this student. So, but nobody did that.
Yeah.
So,
have you thought about going into like investigative journalism? Because it sounds like.
Well, see, this was actually my original career plan. Was I was going to be an investigative journalist, but never happened. Fortunately, because I wanted to write for the Washington Post, and well, the Washington Post is now a disaster. But and I would have been toward the end of my career, like in hanging on by my fingernails in a dying industry.
Yeah.
So I'm glad I didn't do that.
But how do you view the internet at large as a researcher? Like, how do you vet sources for how valid something can be?
So you have to have the skill of doing that. So I find a source online, and if it's not telling me where it comes from, like I find a letter from person A to person B, and it doesn't tell me where they found that letter, then but I think I really want to use that letter because it speaks to whatever it is I'm writing about. Then I have to backtrack to the archive where it should be. And so like for this book, A Hiker's History, I really wanted to understand the hiker experience. So all hikers. And through hikers we know a lot about because through hikers wrote books, they wrote articles, they wrote in trail journals, the website Trail Journals, which is a wonderful source. They they wrote letters to the ATC or to the trail clubs about their experiences. So we know a lot about through hikers, but we don't know a lot about like if you and a friend of yours just did a section hike of 2 days, you didn't write a book about that. Nobody would read it if you did, because it's just like you did 18 miles and went home. So the only place to find that was in the shelter logs. And so I read the original sources. And I was lucky because the volunteers at the AT Museum had been digitizing those for years. And you can only read the digital copies by going to the museum because it's not clear that when you write from a copyright standpoint, when you write in a shelter log, it's not clear that you're giving anyone permission to publish that. And so the museum's a little nervous about making their database available online. But you can go to the museum and sit down at a terminal or a computer and and read whatever you want. And so people go. It's really fun. People go and try to find themselves from their through hike in 1987 or whatever. So I just had to read those. And like I said, I read hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages. And it's from that the story begins to emerge.
My last derailing question, just because it's on the subject.
Yeah, keep going. This is good.
Are you scared about the future, maybe even the present of truth? Is like we have so many different people that have completely different views of what is happening in the world. Does that terrify you as somebody who's a historian and like really values an objective truth?
Well, we used to say in the early days of the internet, we used to say pics or it didn't happen, right? That doesn't work anymore,
right? Because
you can make a picture of anything,
right,
that you want. And so visual evidence is going to be incredibly hard to fact check because it's so compelling, and it gets better every week. A new model comes out and it's just better, and it's really, really hard to tell that something's a fake. And so the value of archives is going to increase because the physical documents, the actual photo is. I don't have like 150 photos or something like that in this book, and every single one of those is a real photo. I didn't use generative AI; they all came out of archives. And so archives, I think, are going to have this renaissance because people are going to be so skeptical, as they should be, that they're going to want to see the originals.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I'm hoping that means that people start investing in archives again, because it's not sexy to put money into an archive.
Yeah. All right, Sean's get us back on the tracks here.
All right. Which direction will I go? Let's jump back to what we were talking about before we hit record, because I think this will tie into a couple good stories. But you mentioned that you have had hearing issues for most of your life. And then when you went to describe why, that was just going to be its own great story. So tell us about that.
So my grandfather, who I loved to death, he was just like, all I wanted to do was spend time with my grandfather, the way a lot of people have this view of their grandparents. And but he was a country boy from Mississippi, and he hated snakes above all things. And he had this like passionate hatred for snakes. And he had a piece of property outside of Atlanta, which we called it the farm. The suburbs have long since rolled over it, and but it was a rural piece of property and it had a pond on it. And there were water moccasins in the pond. And water moccasins are like copperheads that swim. You know, they have bad attitudes about the world, and they would like to bite you just 'cause. And so he had a system for killing them. So if you imagine, using my phone as show and tell here, if you imagine a piece of 4x8 sheet of tin, you know, the sort of corrugated tin that people put on the roof of a shed or whatever. So the pond is here, we're over here on land. He would put this piece of tin right down next to the edge of the water, and the water moccasins would get up into the corrugations, and they'd have little handles on either side. And one of my cousins and I would have to go and tip the tin up like that.
While they're on there?
While they're under there. But my grandfather would be standing right here with his 12 gauge. And if there were any snakes, which we always prayed there weren't, because if there were, he would let loose with both barrels. And then it was just like mud and snake all over you.
Snake bits.
And I was, for whatever reason, I was always on the left side. So the shotgun was like 4 feet from my right ear. And so, you know, when you're a kid, you have hearing tests in school. I don't know, it's like 4th grade or something like that. And so I have my hearing test, and they tell you to put the headphones on, raise your hand when you hear the tone. So I'm sitting there, and the woman doing the test taps me on the shoulder and says, raise your hand when you hear the tone. Okay, I got it. And then she takes the headphones off, she puts them on herself, and then finally I hear the tone, and so, you know, I raise my hand, and she gives me a note and says, give this to your mom. So, which was, take him to an audiologist. So I go to the audiologist, and the first question is, she tested me and said, you know, have you been around any loud noises? So I said, yeah. And she said, what? And I said, well, a shotgun. And she says, oh, tell me about that. So I told that story, and my mother's looking at me like, what? She had no idea.
Is this your mom's dad who's doing the shooting?
That was her father. And so we get home, and she marches straight to the telephone, you know, picks it up, dials, because it was dial phone in those days, dials him and just rips him a new one right there on the phone. That was the end of the snake shooting, but the damage was done.
Yeah. Damn. So were you wearing hearing aids from 4th grade on?
No, I just got hearing aids like a year ago.
Okay.
So a year and a half maybe.
Yeah.
And I mean, there were some advantages to having hearing loss. I would never wish it on anybody, but I became a really good lip reader. And so when I was a bartender, that was a great skill. Because, you know, music's loud and servers are calling out drink orders, and I couldn't hear them, but I could see what they were saying.
Yeah.
So.
I thought you were going to say it gave you an excuse to ignore your wife. That's where my head goes.
No, my wife also has hearing loss, and she uses it as an excuse to ignore me.
Yeah.
So.
Tit for tat.
It seems like your grandpa might not have been an outlier, because in your book you write about how up until basically the environmental movement, the snakes were equally as hated up and down the trail, and that a lot of the trail logs showed entries of people bragging about how many snakes they'd killed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's really because of the advent of the environmental movement that we start adopting practices from Native Americans, that we should be living in harmony with nature, not killing it and not destroying it. And so poisonous snakes were seen as a problem to be eliminated, not something to be accommodated. And so, you know, like Gene Espy, who is just, you know, passed away this past year, and at 99, is just one of the kindest, gentlest, and most wonderful humans that's ever lived. And in his book about his thru-hike, which was, you know, the second successful thru-hike, he talks about how many snakes he killed with his walking stick. And when I went to visit him in 2019, he got it off the wall and handed it to me, and because he's really proud of that walking stick. And I have a photo in the book of that stick like leaning against the original Katahdin sign, which looked nothing like the one that we see today. And but he just loved that walking stick. And I have to admit, I sort of turned it around to look to see if there was like snake blood, because it's just like this log of how many snakes he killed along the way.
Yeah.
But that was normal. That was just totally normal.
And think how far we've come, because, you know, running the trek, I remember a few years ago, someone posted a picture of them holding a snake. I think it was a garter snake. I'm not sure. It was a non-poisonous snake. And got a lot of very angry comments about, like, this is violating leave no trace. Mm-hmm. They didn't do anything to the snake. The snake was perfectly fine. But, like, to go from, like, celebrating how many snakes you've killed to getting ridiculed for even touching one is, like, that's massive improvement.
Yeah.
there's like tens of 20s in some of these entries. Like
Yeah.
today I killed like 20 rattlesnakes, 17 copperheads. Like
I understand the impulse.
I don't know how
hate
you have time.
snakes.
How do you have time to walk?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll admit, I really don't like copperheads. Like, I'm
I mean,
not
I
killing
don't,
them.
I don't like snakes.
Yeah, so I like snakes. I just don't like copperheads because
Yeah.
they don't. Rattlesnakes warn you. Copperheads just bite you.
But aren't copperheads pretty docile? And my entire experience is based on hiking the AT. Somebody found a den and was like kind of poking him with his trekking pole, and like they didn't react at all. It was like,
That guy was lucky.
yeah,
Yeah, because they tend to have pretty bad attitudes.
Oh, okay.
And I will say, like, for anybody listening or watching, if you go to the Manassas Gap shelter, which I maintain, it's one of the old CCC built shelters from the 30s. It's the only one that I know of that had 2 fire pits. One of them, you can see the concrete slabs, and you can see it in the old photographs. It had 2. I think maybe the CCC just had like extra cement, so they built a second fire pit. But there's riprap on the other side of that, and copperheads nest down in that riprap. And the last couple of years, one of them has been getting up in the fire pit after everybody leaves, because the ashes are warm, and snakes, they're cold-blooded, and they try to find heat. And so, and hikers throw food bits, leftover food, in the fire pit, so the mice come for the food, and then the copperheads eat the mice. This one likes to coil down under the ashes, and so every time I go for trail maintenance, I just take a stick and I throw it in the fire pit, just to see, and like 1 out of 10 times he kind of explodes out of there.
That's so scary.
all right. Note to self: stop telling people that copperheads are docile.
Also, take snakes and make them worse. Put them in like a hot
Fire.
ashy
Yeah.
fire pit and have
Well,
them just like.
That's hell, is what you're describing.
I think it
And
is.
anybody listening, I wish you could have seen the look on Chance's face when I was telling that story.
I don't like
I am
them.
not stopping at that shelter ever again.
Well, I often think like if I hike the AT again, how would that go? Because there's a lot of things like reading the book and just thinking about it, I'm like, I don't like that. And thank God in the moment I don't know all these things. But there was a shelter in New Jersey that we had stopped at for lunch that had just black snakes, but there were like 3 or 4 black snakes in the ceiling rafters
Yeah,
of the
sure.
shelter. And I sat down on the edge to have lunch, and I heard a thud, and I looked up, and like multiple snakes dangling above your head when you look up. I have never run so fast in my life. And this is the closest I've ever been to Zach's motto of "fuck shelters, I'm sleeping in my tent." Because reading your book after that, I'm just like, why would I ever sleep in a shelter?
You had your own snakes on a plane moment on
But
trail.
You know what's crazy is apparently, allegedly, Mills will tell you, not me, but shelters didn't used to just be the flat bed that like you'd put your shit on top of. That was meant for like you'd bring like branches and soft things to make a little pillow. Apparently they used to have like cots and bunk beds and shit in them.
Oh, yeah. I can remember sleeping in cots in a shelter.
Really?
What gives?
Yeah.
Why'd they take them away?
They were expensive to maintain, and people would vandalize them. But I'm surprised they took out the bunk beds. I mean, some still have them. Like Bryant Ridge in Virginia still has bunks, and that's actually, and the new one in just north of Manassas Gap, Whiskey Creek. Or Whiskey Hollow, they put in PATC put bunks in there. It's actually really efficient because somebody can sleep under the bunk and then somebody can sleep above them.
Yeah.
So it adds an extra sleeping space.
Yeah.
You had mentioned earlier on all the trash that would accumulate at shelters. Those who are hiking the trail in recent years, hopefully, have noticed that does not exist on the scale that it did in the 70s, nearly as much as it did. But there were a couple of changes that happened, and you talk about this in the Lost Trail book, to ensure that the trashing of shelters went down. Can you talk to us about kind of that problem and the resolution that they came up with?
Yeah, I mean, we just didn't really have the same kind of outdoor ethics in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s that we have today. And as hiking became more and more popular in the 60s, it kind of exploded as an activity. In the 60s, people left a lot of trash behind, and the shelters actually had burn pits or burn barrels at them. So you're supposed to burn your trash, but a lot of people didn't. And I've got some photos in the book of shelters with just massive piles of trash around them. And it got so. And one of the reasons for this is not necessarily hikers, but people just coming to the shelters to party, because a lot of the shelters
That still happens.
Yeah, and a lot of the shelters were built close to the road for the convenience of the trail clubs, that first to get the materials in there to build them, and then later to maintain them. It was just easier, and so they really became party locations. My favorite story about that is tumbling run shelters in Pennsylvania, the snoring and no snoring shelters. So the Finneys, who have maintained those shelters since forever, I mean, like 30 years. Mrs. Finney used to be a middle school principal or an assistant principal or something like that, an official at a local middle school. And so when they took over the shelter, it was like the high school party place. And she told me they would go up there on Friday and Saturday night, and the kids would all be partying, and she'd be like, "Oh, Chance, hi. Does your mom know you're here? Do you want me to call her and let her know you're okay?" You know. And so the party moved somewhere else after that, because Tumbling Run is like, you can see the road. It's like 50 yards, maybe not even 50 yards. But so because they were so close to the roads, they were just party locations, and so it had really, vandalism and trash and everything had really gotten out of hand. And I talk about it in detail in the second book, that the clubs in the ATC seriously considered in the early 70s just scraping them all off. It was that bad. And ultimately what they decided was to move the ones that were too close to the road, move most of those into more inaccessible from the road locations, but still spaced appropriately for the hikers. And so that was one thing that they did. And they just ditched a whole bunch of shelters altogether, like Wiggin Springs, which may be the picture that you looked at with all the trash. That was just gone. And then the second thing is they worked with the Forest Service and the Sierra Club to develop Leave No Trace. And the third was that they added the Ridge Runner program. And so and the Ridge Runners, a big part of what they do is talk to people about Leave No Trace. And so and I can't remember now what the original name of Leave No Trace was, but it was like 9 words or something like that.
You wrote about it when you talked about the Vibram guy.
Yeah, and it was just like too long. And so whoever rebranded it as Leave No Trace was a genius, and because that's easy to remember.
Yeah.
And so it's really made a big difference. And but the trail used to be pretty trashed.
Yeah. It's good to get that historical perspective about it, because it's hard to know if something like Leave No Trace is having an impact. Otherwise.
It's had a huge impact.
Yeah,
it's had a huge impact. And like during COVID, when everybody was trying to get outside, the AT had this big boom in popularity, especially where it was close to cities. And I was getting a little grumpy about it, because a lot of people who had no experience hiking were just out in the woods maybe for the first time. And so the number of plastic water bottles I was picking up and that kind of thing. And somebody from the Leave No Trace Foundation kind of gave me an attitude adjustment about it. He said, this guy named Bryce Esplin, and he said, we're at the beginning of a major climate crisis. And so everybody we get into the woods is a potential ally. And so instead of being pissed at them, use it as an educational opportunity. And so I have, with one exception, the dog shit bags. I'm never going to forgive anybody for that. It's like, I don't know what that is. Your dog takes a crap on the trail, and so you take a piece of plastic and you wrap it up, and then you leave it there for the poop bag fairy to come and collect it at night. Like, I'm never forgiving that.
It is significantly worse than just placing the shit elsewhere.
For the podcast, I interviewed one of the senior mammal biologists for the National Zoo and the Smithsonian, and I asked him, is it okay to just flick your dog shit off into the woods? And he said, of course it is. Dogs don't carry pathogens that are bad for other animals. He said, just take a stick and flick it.
Interesting.
That makes me feel so good, because when Harper goes off trail, what she does off trail is between her and God, And when she comes on, if she's shitting on the trail, I've got to pick it up.
Yeah. No, you don't have to pick it up. You just have to flick it off to the side.
Now I know. Now I've got someone who told me it was okay. I feel better. But when she goes off into the woods, I just usually am like, that's between you and other things, not me. Speaking of all, like, the trash and the dog poop bags and all the things that just are so annoying, but also, I mean, I hesitate to call it cool, because I don't think flaming snakes in fire pits are cool, but all these facets that you kind of witness when you're maintaining a shelter, and you maintain the Manassas Gap shelter. What does that involve? Because you mentioned earlier the couple that maintains the priest and kind of the things that they've seen, but what does it entail to maintain a shelter, and what has that experience kind of taught you?
So Manassas Gap is a really interesting shelter, because it's the closest shelter to DC, and so it's a really popular day use shelter. Because it's a really fun hike to just park at the base of the mountain. It's 2.5 miles up to the shelter, 2.5 miles back to your car. You get a nice 5-miler in. You stop for lunch or a snack or whatever at the shelter, and then you go home. And that's really what the AT was built for in the first place, was that kind of hike. And so, on a nice weekend in the spring or in the fall, 40, 50 people could stop at the shelter. And, like I have a Korean church group that comes at least once a month, and I love them because I always know when they're there because they pick up all the micro trash. It looks like somebody's gone around the shelter with a vacuum cleaner. It's great. I just know that there's not one little like edge of a Starbucks coffee packet or anything, like no granola bar wrappers, no cigarette butts. So, and they come in a big group, like 30, 40 people. But so the shelters, I quote this historian from Appalachian State University. He's an architectural historian in the book. He talks about the shelters as nodes of an ephemeral community where people come together for an hour, 5 hours, overnight, and then they disperse again. And so they have this moment of community at the shelters. So that's a node, and then they disperse. And that's kind of a cool thing. And so even if you don't sleep in the shelters, you stop, and you meet people, and I don't sleep in the shelters either unless it's seriously storming. I just don't like mice running across me in the night. You don't like snakes. I don't like mice running across my head. So so it's just a cool thing about the ATs and other trails with these kinds of shelters.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing. It's just being a shelter maintainer has reinforced for me. And it's just fun to see the joy that people have coming to the shelter, especially day hikers, because I see so many of them, and they're just like so happy to be there. They're like, I'm on the Appalachian Trail, because like for them it's this really big thing because they've heard about it, and they'll so they just want to know. They want to know the history of the shelter. They want to know, like, do you get paid for taking care of it? No, it's totally volunteer. And let me tell you how to sign up as a volunteer. So that's really cool. But it's also led to a lot of innovation. So like now up and down, not only the AT, but lots of trails, we have these moldering privies that composting privies and that are not nearly as smelly as the old pit toilets. And that's really an innovation from a member of the Green Mountain Club. He'd heard that, like in Switzerland, they were doing something similar, or in Italy, I forget now, that they were doing something similar. And so he was an engineer, and so he just like applied his engineering knowledge, and now we have these much better things. So you asked, like, what does it entail? So I go, I go once a month. We have a cabin up on Blue Mountain there. It's only like a mile and a half from the shelter, so I can walk really easily. And so I go once, twice a month. Peak hiking season, I'm there at least twice a month. And I'm picking up trash. I'm talking to people. I had to replace the benches on the picnic table a couple of years ago because some high school kids broke them, and these are like 2x12s. It takes a lot of force to.
Wasn't
break
an
this.
accident, is what you're saying.
They had to have stood on the picnic table and jumped as high in the air as they could and come down in the middle of the bench to snap them both. So I made one of my sons help me haul in these giant boards, for like a mile to get. It's like 3/4 of a mile to get there, and a lot of bitching and moaning from my son. And the struts of the table. It's one of the old metal strutted tables. They were bent, made to straighten them out. So sometimes you have to do stuff like that. The only part I'm not a big fan of is, but it's part of the job. So we have a moldering privy now that's 2 years old, and it has 2 bins. And when one bin is full, then we'll move the toilet seat over to the other side and start filling up the bin on the other side. But we have to, as they say, knock down the cone. Because it starts to build up, and so we have a specialized tool for that. And
the cone knocker.
Yeah, so I don't even know it's like some kind of gardening tool, but everybody's got one. So you have to open the thing and kind of churn around a little bit, and because you want that bin to be completely full, not just the cone. So knocking down the cone is not my favorite.
Do you make your son do that?
No. There's been some refusing on that.
Yeah, tough to get him to go back.
How many face masks are you wearing? Because the answer is not enough for me still.
So actually, I wear nitrile gloves and a face mask when I do it. But when it is eventually just compost, then it's just dirt, and it's not dangerous at all. But I know for sure that there are at least 2 Nalgenes down in there. Don't ask me how. I'm sure there's at least one phone, because how many people do you know have lost their phone in a toilet?
Well, we read a story about a woman in Alaska that dropped her phone in the privy, and she went to lean in to get it, and there was a grizzly down there. Now it makes me wonder if it's one of your hoax stories.
There's
Yeah,
also
that one I would want to fact check. But
Yeah.
We had looked it up.
I mean, there's also a story of a guy being in one of those. Yeah, I think he's.
Wait, a guy was just saying, this is Slumdog Millionaire.
No, this is legitimately like a peeping Tom type of feller.
yeah.
But yeah,
You would just hang out in the poo?
yeah, yes, like in an outhouse.
You gotta really want to be a peeping Tom.
The scariest of the peeping
All right, I'm gonna
Toms.
dig the story up.
Oh my God.
But so that's the least fun part, and then the other part that just, so humans are very contradictory animals, and so I'm a classic example of that. I love street art, so like really beautiful graffiti. I love it, but it really pisses me off when people graffiti my shelter. So like I travel all around the world and I photograph graffiti wherever I go, but then when people get a Sharpie out and write on the inside of the shelter, it really pisses me off. It's like, why are you doing that?
I feel like we're on a good trail right here with the grudges over the dog poo and the graffiti shelter. What are your other pet peeves?
I'm not a big fan at all of people leaving religious or political literature in the shelter box where the shelter log is, because it's not, the shelters are not there for you to proselytize about your faith or your politics. And people, so I'm taking stuff out all the time. I always leave people who are doing trail magic or shuttle drivers, they leave stuff in the box. Like shuttle drivers love to leave their cards, and that's awesome. And because they're just trying to do a nice thing, and they're trying to, they're making a living or making some side hustle living, but they're part of the trail community. They're part of the trail community, but people who are leaving lots of stuff about whatever their religion is or whatever their politics is, just like do that somewhere else. Mm-hmm. So I haul out a lot of empty propane canisters. They're just not that heavy. Just carry them on to the next place where there's a recycling bin or whatever. But a lot of empty propane canisters.
There's always like a funny laugh, I feel like, when it's like you've got less than enough for one more boil in your propane canister, but you don't know what to do with it, so you put it in the hiker box. It's like no one's ever gonna want that. No one, that's not helping anyone.
So quick aside, I googled man found in poop in outhouse. There are several incidents exist where men have been found inside outhouse or porta potty waste tanks. These cases often involve individuals trying to retrieve lost items, acting as peeping toms, or in one 2025 case, a homeless man targeted by workers who moved the porta potty with him still inside. The one I was thinking of, because this is close to home, happened in Boulder. This is from USA Today, which we know can get got, but a Colorado man who hid in the tank of a portable toilet at a yoga festival to spy on women has been sentenced to 3 years in prison and 10 years of probation. I can go into more of the story, but it exists.
You gotta really want to do that.
Yeah, no, you definitely. I wouldn't even say screws loose. I don't think any screws remain at that point.
Yeah.
So The Green Tunnel is an excellent podcast. Do you have one episode that is the most popular?
Yeah. The Appalachian Trail.
Okay.
The one about privies.
Yeah.
That is for sure our most popular. I mean, I would say that and the first episode, because I think, we did 50 episodes before we wrapped it up, and so with podcasts, I think the first episode is sort of generally,
that was true for us for probably the first 7 years of the podcast.
Right.
But
so the first episode, just because people start there at the beginning,
right.
But then when you dig into the analytics, the Appalachian Trail, for sure.
Is there one that you're most proud of?
Yeah, actually, the second episode, that one, I have two. It's really kind of a toss-up. But the second episode is about the communities that were along the trail before the trail. So, like we talk about Rausch Gap in Pennsylvania. And the reason I'm the most proud of that one in some ways is because, the Green Tunnel was a very constructed episode. Each episode was very carefully constructed, narrative. We did a bunch of interviews and we did a lot of soundscapes and stuff like that. And I think that we found some of the best sound for that episode. And there's a song, Pennsylvania Coal, by a country performer in Nashville, that one of our grads. Every episode of the Green Tunnel was produced by a grad student, which is really great. And I was always the voice, and I would help them, but they would set up the interviews, they would do the original script edits and all that stuff. So it was just such a great learning episode. But she found this song, Pennsylvania Coal, which was perfect. And so I wrote to the agent for that musician and said, here's what we're doing, can we use it? And she wrote back and said, yeah, the performer would be honored.
That's cool.
And so it's just like we have a quotation from somebody about like a dying coal community, and then we segue into that music, and it's just, we kind of nailed it, So I'm really proud of that. And then I am really proud of our episode about race in the trail called The Weight of History. Because Crystal Williams, who we interviewed extensively for that, who was a thru-hiker in 2013, she's a human rights lawyer in Maine these days, but and she hiked as a black woman alone on the trail, and some of what she has to say is really, really powerful.
Yeah, and I know it gets pretty emotional, like when she reflects on that she's doing it voluntarily for fun, and like thinking about her ancestors were doing it in a very different way. Yeah. So I just feel so honored to have gotten to know Crystal through that and consider her a friend now. Yeah. And so I'm really proud of that one. Yeah. Go ahead, Jones.
To stay on the Green Tunnel or to swap? I'm going to swap, because why not? Chaos. I really enjoyed the book you wrote prior to the new one. This is Virginia's Lost Appalachian Trail. I picked it up when I was at the Loudoun County Trail Days. Oh, and you were there too, and I couldn't find you.
It's Loudoun?
Loudoun.
Yeah, that is actually, I'm going to say, I do a lot of festivals. That one is one of my favorites. It's just, there's so much that happens, and it's just really, the vibe is just great.
Well, I was surprised by it, because not that I think I should know everything, but we do this for 9 years, and we go to Trail Days every year. I've never heard of this. Yeah. But my in-laws live in Loudoun County. And so my mother-in-law had sent me a Facebook invite to this event, and I'm like, Zach, have you heard of this? No, it's in Hillsboro, da-da-da. And until I got there, I thought the whole thing was a scam. Because the Facebook event had I think it was 7 or 9 people going, and 2 of them were me and my mother-in-law. So I was like, have you made this up? But we went, and it was great.
Yeah, it's really great.
And I had picked up your book, because I was like, this is perfect. I didn't bring enough books on that trip, I guess. But I thought it was a fascinating read. And it really dives into one of the areas that used to be part of the original AT. And then obviously over time, a lot of areas have been rerouted to go off roads and to get to better, more scenic areas or off of private property. But this was a good section south of Raleigh that had Roanoke, that had gotten rerouted. And it was a fascinating read about the trail before the one that we're currently hiking in a different part of the state. Can you, I guess, introing the conversation around this book, can you talk about, in the beginning, when routing the trail for the Appalachian Trail in general, southwestern Virginia, and why that was such a pain in the butt compared to other areas?
Yeah, so I mean, the short version of the story is that, as you say, the trail's been rerouted 1,000 times, and every once in a while somebody tries to figure out all the reroutes, and then they give up. I always tell them, don't even start.
From Dream to Reality does a pretty good job.
Yeah, but it's still there's and now it's already there, since that book was published just a few years ago. They're already up, I don't know how many more, but this was a 300-mile reroute. The next biggest reroute was when the Georgia Club abandoned Mount Oglethorpe in Georgia, and that was 37 miles. So so this was far and away the single biggest reroute, and it wasn't just finding a viewpoint or getting off road. At its greatest distance, it was more than 50 miles from the route that we hike today.
Conceptually, an entirely different trail.
Totally different trail.
Yeah.
And so the Southwest Virginia, though, was a big problem for the ATC, because they had routed the trail all the way down to basically Lynchburg, Virginia, at the Peaks of Otter, which it also doesn't go to anymore.
Such a cool name, though.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful.
Otter fan.
The Peaks of Otter is just a really beautiful area to hike around in. But So they got it that far. So basically about as far as Lynchburg, and then they got as far as Damascus coming up from the south. And getting from Lynchburg to Damascus, nobody could figure out how to do it. And there were a couple of problems. One, Myron Avery, who was the kind of legendary chairman of the ATC, who was really responsible for the building of the trail in many ways, or leading the building of the trail, he didn't know anybody there. So, like in other parts of the trail route, he could find people who he knew through various connections that he had.
But he didn't like the local connections either.
Yeah, and it's an incredible. Like I'm wearing my Floyd country store hat. Yeah, and because I'm on the among other things, I'm on the board of the Handmade Music School, which teaches traditional mountain music to kids in Floyd, and so it's just an incredibly rural part of the state. I mean, the biggest town today still is Galax, which has a population of about 2,000, and Floyd has a population of, I don't know, 500-600, and Hillsville might be around the same, and that's it for towns of any size. And so there were no places to get clubs together to do the trail scouting and the trail building and trail maintaining. And so because the AT was built on this model of clubs that would do it, and there wasn't a population base for that. And then this guy his name was Shirley Cole, and he was the county agent in Floyd County, and he just kind of pops up one day and he's like, I've solved the problem. I have a route. And Avery freaked out because Avery thought of the Appalachian Trail as his trail. And he didn't want somebody else telling him where it should go. So he hires Roy Osmer, who had scouted the Georgia section, to get up there fast and scout it. So those people, as Avery put it, down there can't tell us where the trail should go.
This is the best story of just funny karma.
Yeah. And so then Osmer gets up there, and he gets to the Peaks of Otter and stays at a hotel, which is long since been torn down. But and then he starts trying to find a route, and he gets totally lost. And because that part of the state, the mountains go like this, like up and down, and he just gets totally lost. And so he does what he's not supposed to do. He goes into Floyd and he talks to Shirley Cole, and he says, like, hey, could you show me where you wanted to route the trail? And Cole, of course, is very happy and shows him. And so then Osmer sends this 11-page single-space report to Myron Avery saying, okay, I've got the route all plotted out for you. And he goes kind of point by point along the way to where it should go. And like the next to the last sentence is, and Mr. Shirley Cole of Floyd, Virginia was very helpful to me in this process. But that's like on page 11,
yeah.
you know. And so then Avery triumphantly, he was not yet the chairman, but he was kind of running things. And he writes to the then chairman, Judge Perkins, and says, you know, we have solved the problem of Southwest Virginia. And so then from 1930 until 1952, that was the route. But it was such a fun book to write, and because I thought I was just going to investigate the route of the trail and why it changed and all that. And what I found was that it was really a story about the people who live there now and how they still remember it. And so it's like about the persistence of historical memory in rural Appalachian communities, because people. Well, I was just down there a few weeks ago, and one of the people I feature in the book is a guy named Doug Bell, and Doug tragically passed away about a year ago. He had pancreatic cancer lung cancer just came out of nowhere, and so I spent the day with his wife, Arlene, because we're just friends, you know, and you develop these obligations to your friends, and I never thought I would make friends she lives in Copper Hill, Virginia, which isn't even really a town. Used to be, but it's not anymore. And so it really became a story about the people. And at the very beginning, it was such a challenge, though, because there just wasn't much of an archival record to work with. And so I figured, well, I just have to go. And so I got in my car and I drove down and started talking to people. It's not really what you would call scientific research. And I went into the Lakeview Diner. There is no lake. There never was a lake. I don't know why it's the Lakeview. And I'm sitting at the counter, and it's your classic small town diner. And I ordered breakfast, and this waitress is there, and I said to her, so did you know that the Appalachian Trail used to go right past your front door? Really? It did? That's really interesting. I've heard of that trail, you know. And I said, yeah, you know, for like 20 plus years, it went right past your front door. Oh, that's great. And I said, does anybody ever talk about it? And she thinks about it, and she says, well, Charlie does. I said, oh, that's great. Does Charlie have a last name? She thought that. She said, I'm sure he does. I said, do you know it? No. I said, well, does he come in? Like, yeah, he comes in pretty regular. And I said, like, how regular? Well, regular. So I would have had to sat there for a month waiting for Charlie. I never met Charlie. But along the way, people you just talk to people and they say, oh, well, you should talk to so-and-so. And then that person would say, well, really who you should talk to is this person. So I drove I put, I don't know how many hundreds of miles on my car. But I eventually found people like Doug, who the trail went across the farm where he grew up.
At that point, how much of the trail was like single track versus on roads?
So that was really that 300 miles was really two different trails, because from McAfee Knob, because they eventually routed it got to McAfee Knob when the Roanoke Trail formed, and then it went, instead of going down toward Dragon's Tooth, if you're going south, instead of going down toward Dragon's Tooth, it took a sharp right where the road crossing is south of McAfee Knob. It went down that road and then crossed over the Roanoke River and then went up over the mountain. Excuse me, south of Roanoke, and then went down mostly the route that the Blue Ridge Parkway takes today, because the Parkway sort of pushed the trail out of the way. And that was mostly road walking until you got to the New River. And then once you cross the New River going south, then it was the Iron Mountain. What is today the Iron Mountain Trail? That was the old AT. So it got across the river and then got up on Iron Mountain and took Iron Mountain all the way to Damascus. So it was a mountain trail on that side of the New River, and it was a road trail on the other side.
Is that a well-maintained trail today?
The Iron Mountain Trail is only sort of well-maintained.
Okay.
Although at the moment, because of all the damage from Hurricane Helene, a big section of the trail just north of Damascus has been routed onto the Iron Mountain Trail because there's just such a disaster from the storm.
So when they did this reroute, was it intentional to get the Triple Crown, the Virginia's Triple Crown, as part of the route, or is that just a coincidence?
No, that came later. Much later. No, they rerouted it because so much of it was either road walking or just on private land, which was really true for the trail. I mean, when the trail was declared complete, or when it became a national park in 1968, something like 800 miles was still road walking. And, so that was the big project after 1968, was to get it off the road. So in 52, they moved it into the Jefferson National Forest where it is today, because that had grown exponentially during the Second World War. The Forest Service was buying up abandoned farms, and timber companies had logged off the mountains and so then sold the land to the Forest Service. And so they could move it onto federal land and get protection for the trail route. That was the main reason.
Speaking of the timber industry and what you had said earlier about the towns, and, people remembering what they had been back then, Damascus you were writing about, and I think everyone listening to this probably knows Damascus from AT days, but you were writing about how the population in Damascus around 1930 was more than double what it is today, and how a big part of that timber industry was passing all that through Damascus.
Right.
Can you tell us what Damascus was like back in the day? Was it still Mock Mill then, or did it already take the name?
I think it was still Mock's Mill then.
It
No,
became
I think it
1886.
Yeah.
You had written, originally known as Mock's Mill, the town only became Damascus in 1886 when former Confederate General John Imboden purchased it and renamed the place for the city in Syria.
Right. Yeah. So it was Mock's Mill for a very long time, and so like the New River Trail is part of the old AT, and then what's the trail that comes down? I'm blanking on the trail.
The Creeper?
Yeah, the Creeper Trail. The Creeper was the old train that went up White Top Mountain and hauling lumber down off the mountain. That's why it was there. And so then when they abandoned the lumbering, then it was available to make into a trail eventually.
This is a crazy stat, Zach. So by 1910, Damascus had become, and I'm quoting Mills in his book, had become one of the main lumber entrepots in the region, and almost all of the trees cut in the valley between Mount Rogers and Iron Mountain, passed down temporary rail lines into Damascus. From there to the rail net running up and down the Shenandoah Valley. Here's the crazy part. So much timber was cut in the region that by 1912, Grayson and Washington counties alone produced more lumber than the entire state of Pennsylvania. entire state. And almost all of that then went through Damascus.
Wow.
So it was actually a really important commercial hub.
Yeah.
For that kind of work, and now it's the town we know.
What was it like between that like peak there and where it is now with this huge Trail Days crowd showing up every summer?
So Damascus just got slowly smaller as towns where the industry has moved on. When you're out of the room, we were talking about Roush Gap, Pennsylvania, which the trail goes right through that old abandoned town, which was a mining town, and the mines played out, and so the mining industry pulled out, and so the town died, and Damascus was slowly dying, but towns have a tenacity to them, as long as they have enough people to keep sort of a critical mass of people employed. So, like, you have to have a drugstore, you have to have a post office, you have to have a bank, you have to have a school, and if you have those things, then people stay. And Damascus was just getting smaller and smaller. It was contracting, and then hiking became more popular in the 60s and 70s, and so more and more hikers started coming through. And this was really an unanticipated consequence of the AT. Benton MacKaye was not interested in rural development. He didn't think the trail was going to be an economic engine for these rural communities, but it is. And so Damascus, is kind of the poster child for that because of Trail Days. But there, Hot Springs has, a lot happens in Hot Springs because of the hikers, and not just through hikers, but lots just hikers coming to the Hot Springs area to hike. And there are places all up and down the trail where that's true. And so, like where our cabin is in Linden, Virginia, at the bottom of the mountain there's a little country store that it's actually just now closing for other reasons, but it wouldn't have been there for so long if it weren't for people hiking on the trail.
I know there's a lot of friction in the COVID years between like the ATC telling people not to hike and a lot of the small towns that depend on the tourism that comes from the AT.
It was really, that was such a tough call because, people forget, I think, first of all, I totally get how upset people were if they'd been planning their thru hike for however long and then they're told trail's closed.
Right.
I would have been really mad too.
Yeah.
But I was talking to a hiker a couple of years ago about this, and he was somebody who then hiked in 2021 instead of 2020, but was still mad. And I said, well, so where do you live? And he told me, and I said, so how long is it going to take you to get to an emergency room if you get sick? And he said, 15 minutes. And I said, yeah, so there are places in rural southwest Virginia, rural western North Carolina, East Tennessee, where it could be an hour and a half for the nearest emergency room. In the very earliest days of COVID, people were dying. Yeah. And nobody knew anything.
Right.
There was just total ignorance about this virus.
Yeah.
And so in that moment, part of the decision was to protect those rural communities from plague vectors, people carrying the virus with them. And so it's kind of a privileged position to say, I can't believe they did that. And it's also sort of a forgetting of the fact that at the very early stage, right when everybody starts their thru hikes in the South, was right when the virus kind of washed over the country, and like New York, the morgues couldn't keep up. Yeah, it was that bad initially.
Yeah,
so.
I definitely don't see it as like a good guys versus bad guys scenario.
Yeah.
But
I'm glad I didn't have to make the call.
Yeah, for sure,
because it was a really hard call.
Definitely.
While we're telling some fun stories, I think based on the timing of this episode coming out and it being when a lot of people are still in the window of starting a northbound thru hike, if they're listening to this, it could be fun to talk about Springer Mountain, where they're starting from and taking off from, and why they're starting there and not Mount Oglethorpe, and what chickens have to do with all of it. Right. But can you kind of talk us about that reroute and what went on there?
Yeah, so it's important to remember that that the AT is really close to big cities, because MacKaye wanted it, when he proposed the trail, he wanted it to be close to cities so that people could, and he really meant workers, because it was proposed originally as a socialist project, a place that workers could go on the weekends. So it should be close to all the big cities of the East Coast, so it would be easy for them to hop on a train and go up into the mountains. Turned out to be more of a middle-class playground, because workers didn't want to hike. They wanted to sleep and go to a baseball game or get drunk or whatever, hang out with their kids. So But so Oglethorpe was the closest mountain to Atlanta, and so they started there. But it was all privately owned, and all that land was private. And so the trail originally, was started at Oglethorpe, and then it was 37 miles to Springer. But you came down off of Oglethorpe and you had to walk across this valley that was just filled with chicken farms. And if you've ever been around a southern chicken farm in the summer, you know why the hikers bitched and moaned about it, because there are few things on this planet that smell worse. Trust me. My grandfather used to take me to those chicken farms, and they're just as disgusting as anything could be. And hikers would talk about having to walk through chicken shit on their way to Springer. And so that was one problem, was it was just nasty. And the second was that the developer, the landowner, hired a developer, and they started building vacation houses all over the mountain. And people who owned the vacation houses were not so into having a trail run through their backyard. So they started canceling the easements on the mountain. So they were going to have to take it down to the bottom of the mountain. Well, now they're just in the chicken farms. Who wants that? So the next mountain north is Springer. And so they moved it to Springer because that was in the Cherokee National Forest.
When you were reading through the trail logs, did you ever find evidence of people quitting their thru-hike because of the chicken farms?
Not because of the chicken farms, no, but I found a few letters of hikers saying in the Georgia archives, just talking about how incredibly nasty it was, and I can't believe I had to do that.
So should people just be grateful for the Amiclola stairs then?
Well, they could always start at the lodge.
True.
Get your picture taken at the arch and then go start at the lodge, because the trail begins not at the bottom of the stairs. That is the approach trail, not the trail, right?
There you go.
I haven't done the stairs.
I did the stairs, yeah. Okay, so you were talking about what MacKaye intended. I can never say his name right. And something I thought was really interesting about your newer book, which will take us kind of full circle back to where we started a bit, is back to the thru hikers versus section hikers. I found it really interesting. There was a part where you were tying your book back to the beginning where you introed that concept, and you were talking about how thru hikers probably weren't even what Benton intended when he planned this trail.
No, he never did. Yeah.
How he might not have even liked them. Like, can you kind of go into?
Well, it's that he didn't. It's not that he didn't like them, but I found in the archives. It was in the ATC archives. Some guy from the Forest Service did an oral history with him when he was 95, just before he died in 1975, and it's really funny to listen to today because this guy from the Forest, MacKaye was, he was already blind and his voice was failing and just a little hard to hear him. But the guy from the Forest Service says to him, "Yeah, Benton, can you believe it? There are almost 200 people this year trying to hike the whole trail. Almost 200. Wow." It seems like such a tiny number now. And MacKaye kind of chuckles a little bit and he says, well, something like, well, good for them. And, that's, if they make it, it's something to be proud of. But he said, I want to give an award to the person who takes the longest to hike the trail.
The last one to Katahdin wins.
Because his view was that you should be hiking the trail to observe nature. And if you were trying to go fast, you weren't seeing anything.
Oh, so he would have been really pissed about all the FKT hikers.
Yeah, he would have not have been into the FKT. Oh. Absolutely not. Because he wanted people to stop and look at nature. And and just sort of be with the forest, and you can't do that if you're trying to sort of, fastest known time. So,
that's interesting.
So that's he didn't. I don't think he cared about thru hiking or not thru hiking. I think he cared about speed. He wasn't a fan of that.
Yeah, appreciating the trail.
Yeah.
I'm gonna shift gears entirely, unless you got
Do
something tangential to that. In your Native American history episode on the Green Tunnel, I'd never heard of the Great Indian Warpath.
Ooh.
The Warrior Path, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, yes. It's the Haudenosaunee, which we used to call the Iroquois, had the Warrior Path that extended from their lands in the north down into the south. And it was, calling it the Warrior Path makes it sound like it was a path of war, but it was also a path of commerce. It was a path of cultural exchange, and ran down through the Shenandoah Valley, and then along the route, which the original route of the trail in Southwest Virginia took, which then became a colonial era road that they called the Philadelphia Road, it was a Philadelphia Road if you're going north, or the Carolina Road if you were going south. And then the Park Service said, when they were building the Blue Ridge Parkway, they're like, oh, look, a road. So they paved it over and made it into the Blue Ridge Parkway.
It's the same one as the Great Wagon Road. We've talked about that one like once or twice.
So much of the trails that we use today were portions of them were indigenous paths, not the summits, because indigenous people tended to stay away from summits because those were the abode of their gods, and you could get into trouble if you got up there.
Yeah. To that point, I know Katahdin has a very interesting history. Tell us about that.
So, Katahdin is the holy mountain of the Abenaki people, and so Pomola is their name for it, and it's I think it's hard for them in some ways to see it as a recreational resource that we see it as, and because I've never talked to anybody in the Abenaki Nation about it, but just things I've read that it's a little challenging. But at the same time, the Baxter State Park is such an interesting park because, it was a gift of Governor Baxter to the people of Maine, but it is sort of sits slightly outside the state park system. It has its own board of trustees, and their mandate is to preserve it, both as the mountain of the Abenaki people, but also as a fragile ecosystem. And so, there's a time, I guess it was 2016, when things were getting a little out of hand up on the summit, and Scott Jurek kind of went a little too far, and that, for the trustees of Baxter State Park, that was kind of the last straw, and they sent a pretty terse memo to the ATC saying, you either solve this problem or the sign's moving down to the parking lot.
Do you think he was used as a scapegoat in that incident?
I think it was more that he was the final straw.
Yeah,
is probably the better way to put it, and because the tension, I don't think something like that explodes over one thing.
Right.
I think the frustration had been building for a while, and that was just kind of, it was really visible because then he's on the Today Show or one of the morning shows, and then so it's really visible.
Yeah. What do you think the primary offense was there? Because I know there were a couple of things cited. One was the littering with the fact that champagne had hit the earth. That seemed a little silly to me.
My take on it, and Hawk Matheny from ATC knows 1,000 times more about this than I ever will, but because he was really involved in all the conversations about it, so he's actually the better person to ask. But my take on it is that the bigger concern was a kind of growing sense that hikers, and I'm not saying through hikers, I'm just saying hikers, people going up for the day or whatever, weren't being serious about the restrictions, and in particular they weren't staying on the trails, and so there's plant life up there that's incredibly fragile, and I think that in some ways may have been what pissed them off about Jurek's group more than anything else, is that cameramen stomping around on these fragile plants. Because champagne cork somebody could pick up, but those plants, once they're dead, they're dead. Yeah, and it's a very fragile ecosystem up there.
So how close did we get to that not being the northern terminus of the AT?
I talked to Hawk about that, and he said it wasn't as close as it sounded.
Okay,
but that kind of pushback from the trustees was a way of getting everybody's attention.
Sure,
they've been complaining about it for a while, and nobody was paying attention to their satisfaction.
Yeah.
And but if it had continued, I think if other people had continued to abuse the summit and just ignore the rules, then they might have put the sign. Would it have stayed in the parking lot? I don't know, but that certainly would have gotten everybody's attention.
Yeah, it did a good job. It definitely, that was the first time since I started paying attention to the world, and it wasn't that much longer before it that became part of my world. But there's definitely a attention shift after that year. Yeah. Which is a good thing. If the mission of the park is to preserve it, it seems like on the trajectory that it was, there was a question if that could have happened.
Right.
You have an entire episode dedicated to the Katahdin sign.
Yeah, it was really fun.
Yeah, tell us about that.
So the original Katahdin sign was just a 4x4 stuck in the ground with a signboard on it, and it said you're at the Mount Katahdin summit, and gave the elevation and how many miles it was to Mount Oglethorpe. And
was that Avery that brought it up there?
Yeah, and I don't think they had permission either. I think they did it without permission, but they and it was just white with black lettering, and there was one of those
old sign in the museum anywhere. I want to see that.
I don't think it survived.
Okay,
I don't think it survived, but but they're photos of it, and like I got a photo in this book, and the sandwich board sign comes in much later. And in the podcast episode, I interviewed the guy who made the first, or was responsible for getting the first one up there, and he did multiple iterations because the weather was kind of strong up there, and so they had to make multiple ones. And my take on he's retired from doing that kind of stuff, and now the sign is airlifted up with a helicopter, but they used to pack them up. It was like a crew of 4 or 5 guys who would take all the building materials and carry it all up the mountain. So people talk about, well, it's kind of a difficult hike up there to the sign. Imagine doing it with like 75, 80 pounds of building materials on your back, and then disassembling the sign on the mountain and carrying 75 or 80 pounds of building materials back down.
Yeah.
So, but it's truly whoever. Like the decision to make it the sandwich board that people could stand on or lie on or jump off of or whatever, that was genius.
Yeah.
That was really genius.
That was smart because we're going to do it probably anyway, which is unfortunate and hard, but you have to imagine at the end of the trip, people are excited. So that was so smart.
We've seen what people do to picnic benches. You can imagine what they're going to do.
Right.
Well, talking about Maine, one of the things that was surprising to me that you wrote about was how the 100-mile wilderness and like Maine as we view it now is so remote on the trail and so far away, and pack what you have. You can't get anything else when you're out there. How that's changed.
Yeah.
And how earlier in the days of the AT, Maine was like the spot to be. Like you had hunting camps everywhere. You could
Fish
stop
camps,
whenever.
Yeah.
What was that like back then, and how did that change?
I mean, it was literally this network of hunting and fishing camps, and so you just you came down off if you're coming from the south, you get to Monson, and then you were just like hiking from camp to camp, and depending on how much you're willing to spend, you could stay in one of these fish camps, and they paddle you around, they cook you a steak for dinner or fresh trout if you caught one, and it was kind of luxe, or could be, and backwoods luxe, but certainly if you've been hiking for a very long time, it would feel really luxe, and so it was just, that's what it was like, and because when they were building the trail in the 20s and 30s, they followed the path of least resistance because they just wanted it done, and so the path of least resistance was to follow existing wagon roads, and in Maine there were these, they called them tote roads, and to get from camp to camp, and so that was just a simpler way to do it. And there were parts that they did have to like bushwhack a trail, like up in the Bigelows, for instance, but and the CCC was really instrumental in helping to finish in 1937, but it was a whole different experience.
Yeah, it's so much nicer, at least for me. What was it like when, and I'm thinking about this from a northbound perspective because that's the way I went, so when we're talking about Maine, I think about being close to the end. What was it like back when the trail was newer, when people had to actually prove that they'd hiked the full trail?
Up until the I guess it was the late 60s, mid to late 60s, you had to actually prove that you had completed the trail, and so there was like a form you had to fill out, and it was and you had to cite like when you were in various locations, and like if you're in Shenandoah National Park, did you meet a ranger? What was that ranger's name? Sometimes you'd have to submit photographs to show that you were in these various places, and somebody would kind of fact check you on it. There was a volunteer at ATC who fact checked you on it, and then the successful tour hikers were always invited to the ATC's annual dinner, and they made a big deal about you. They had a plaque with it was like a big wooden plaque with a brass kind of attachment to it with like a shield with your year, and so it was like a hoopla, and sometimes but as thru hiking began to take off, this volunteer who was some retired guy, it just got to be work, and one day he threw in the towel and he said, I just can't do this anymore. There are too many people doing this, and I can't do all this fact checking, and so that's when they switched to the honor system. And somebody was asking me about that just recently. They're like, really? It's just an honor system? And I said, well, think about it. If you told all so today somebody could send the ATC, it'd be better to do it in the fall, like September you send to the ATC, okay, I've completed my thru hike, and they would send you the certificate and the patch for your pack, and you're a thru hiker. They'd put you in the magazine and all that stuff. But if you told your friends, they'd be like, you did not do that. You were here the whole time. What are you talking about, hiking the whole Appalachian Trail? So they just rely on that kind of social stigma to make sure that people don't lie about it.
I think that still happens today with social media. I see people getting so pissed, like if a hiker in the group is yellow blazing a little bit, like, there's definitely people will fact check one another in various formats.
Yeah, so it's really funny about that. Like as a non thru hiker, I sort of observe it out from the outside, and they're the purists who you have to touch every single blaze, or people who say, well, I hiked from Springer to Katahdin. Okay, I did a little yellow blazing, maybe I did a little aqua blazing, but I went from one end to the other, and so like in Virginia, when you cross the Tye River and then you hike up the Three Ridges, or you can do the Mohar Trail, and you end up at the Maupin Field Shelter either way, and to hike from the Tye River up to the summit of the Three Ridges, which is the last 4,000-foot summit before Vermont, really. It's kind of a stupid, it's like this. There are like almost no switchbacks. And so it's hard. It's really hard. The Mohar Trail is beautiful because there are a whole bunch of swimming holes and waterfalls, but it's hard in a different way because it's all this rock hopping along the way. And it's also 3 miles longer, I think. But when you read the shelter log for Maupin Field, somebody will talk about, and I really enjoyed hiking the Mohar Trail, and then somebody needs to then write, you are no longer a thru hiker.
Yeah.
You should just go home.
Yeah.
It's like, dude, hike your own hike.
Totally. And that's something that is, I would say, specifically unique to the Appalachian Trail, because on the PCT, there's alternates, and like some of the alternates are far more popular than
well,
the
you have to
trail
because
itself.
of wildfires or snow or
that's a
whatever.
Different issue. But even like going to Crater Lake, like anyone that can go to Crater Lake will go to Crater Lake, and that's not the PCT. So the attitude around doing like an alternate trail is just completely different. But the AT, whether you're on trail or in the Facebook groups or whatever it is, the culture that surrounds that trail is very protective over the right way to do it.
Yeah, it's like just hike your own hike.
Totally.
Since the beginning, too, because talking about Earl Shafer, who we mentioned in the beginning, he, on the old AT route that Mills talks about in the Lost Trail book, got lost near Galax, Virginia, and someone offered him a ride to Galax. And there was a whole to-do about how he wasn't the first thru hiker and Gene was, right?
Yeah, right, yeah. And so Earl hiked from Oglethorpe to Katahdin. The trail was a disaster in 1948. It had not been maintained since 1942 when we got into the war and all the volunteers were in war service, whether they were male or female. And a lot of the trail clubs just shut down their activities altogether because of gas shortages, rubber shortages for tires, things like that, or just felt like they should be helping with the war, not taking care of the trail. So, and Gene talks about this in his book too. Even in 1951, a lot of the trail was seriously overgrown, and so there were places where there was no trail marking, and so Earl and Gene and the two guys who hiked southbound in 51, Chester Jingolewski and Martin Papendick, it's like, where's the trail? And so sometimes they just went off onto the road, and a lot of the trail was on road. So much of the trail was on road too, that walking on the road felt normal. And so there were so that's the other complaint about Earl, is that at some point in that 300-mile section that I wrote about, he got on the Blue Ridge Parkway and hiked for a little while. 800 miles of the trail was roadwalk anyway.
Yeah.
But but not a thru hiker.
That's funny. That's the original purism debate.
Yeah.
The first
and
one.
There's a guy who I talk about in the book who was a guy named Jim McNeely, who was so helpful to me. He was really, really nice to me, and it helped me sort of he knew where all the various versions of the old trail were, drove me all around, and couldn't have been more generous to me. So I'm really grateful to him and his dog, who I have a photo of in the book. But Jim is the one who's largely promoted this Earl wasn't the first thru hiker narrative, and it's been kind of an obsession for him. And I think he's finally kind of let it go. But like Earl hiked from Oglethorpe to Katahdin, and he showed people that could be done. Seems like an achievement.
Yeah, for sure. want to be mindful of Mill's time here because we could easily do this for 10 hours.
No.
10 minutes, a good time.
And my wife's out there somewhere waiting. To
Okay,
She's
okay.
still in the car.
Yeah, we'll let you go. Mills, you are a wealth of information. Thank you so much for sharing us just the tip of the iceberg for all of your fun AT knowledge. I guess what's next for you? You mentioned that you retired.
So I'm just starting to the first draft of a book about the first person to hike from one end of the trail to the other. He was a section hiker. I have a picture of him in the book. His name is Eiler Larsen, and he was a Danish-American immigrant who helped build the Long Trail. He was he it's a long story, but he came to the United States in 1916. He lived he like enlisted in the U.S. Army shortly after he got here. Went to France to fight in the First World War, but luckily for him, showed up like the day that the war ended. He was in the occupation force in Germany. Tree fell on him and broke his leg really badly. So not only was he the first person to hike the whole trail, hike from one end of the trail to the other, but he did it as a disabled veteran. Hiked with a cane because of that. But he was kooky, as many hikers, including myself, can be. But he was 6'5", 6'6", and he was the original hiker trash. He was shaggy when nobody was. He had long hair, beard, and he was a street corner preacher, but his religion was happiness through nature. And he would stand on street corners in New York City and Washington, D.C., Asheville, North Carolina, and he would shout at people. He was really tall, really loud, had a Danish accent, and a booming voice, and he would shout at people about, you should be happy, nature is beautiful, this kind of stuff. And people thought he was off his meds, which wasn't a concept in the 1930s, but then they would talk to him and realize, no, he was just filled with joy and happiness, and he wanted to share it with everybody he met. And it was all about nature for him. And so he started hiking in August. He started hiking southbound in August from Katahdin, which is really bad timing. And he made it somewhere into southern Vermont, and then the snows knocked him off trail. And so he spent the winter in Vermont, and then he kept hiking, and he made it to Washington, D.C. the next year. And they stopped for 2 years and hung out with PATC people and lived in a homeless encampment under DuPont Circle in downtown D.C., where he acquired his dog, Happy. He named her, and naturally, because he was all about happiness. And then after a couple of years, he hiked south, and he got as far as Asheville, and then he stayed in Asheville for the Asheville-Gatlinburg area for a year and a half, maybe, doing his street corner preaching thing again. And then he hiked on south, and I wasn't sure that he'd made it. He told people he made it to Oglethorpe, but I wasn't sure. And then when I was in Germany in 2024, I met his great niece, who's a radiologist in Denmark, and she had all these postcards that he had sent home. She didn't know him. She was born after he died, but one of them was a photograph of him and his dog. He said, "At the end of the trail," and it was mailed from Atlanta. Close enough, right? Yeah. So he made it from Maine to Georgia over 6 years, and the trail wasn't even finished until the next year. Oh. And then he left the East Coast and he went to California, and eventually made his way to Laguna Beach, which is kind of a magnet for crazy or weird. Like, the skateboard was invented there. Timothy Leary was arrested there for weed, and when that was still the thing you got arrested for in California, and modern surfboards were invented there. It's just like, and it's an artist colony. He would stand on the street corner where Laguna Canyon Road comes down to the Pacific Coast Highway and preach about happiness.
Wow. And
he became the official greeter of Laguna Beach. So he had these like 2 lives, and everything about him just makes people happy. And so I'm writing his biography.
That's awesome.
Very cool.
And, do you have an estimated release date?
So this is 2026. It's probably either late 27 or early 28.
Okay.
So,
that's awesome.
Yeah, he's just like a fun guy.
Yeah.
And everything about him is fun.
And let us know your website, the podcast, all that.
Yeah. So my website is millskelly.net. So all one word, millskelly.net. My podcast is The Green Tunnel. It's on every podcast platform known to humanity. And we did wrap it up in 2024 because we kind of told the story. We did 50 episodes, and it was kind of nice to put a bow on it. I occasionally wish we hadn't, but
left it open-ended. You could get on the mile by mile.
So
one day.
But so anyway, so it's the Green Tunnel, and I have my 2 books. The most recent one, A Hiker's History of the Appalachian Trail and Virginia's Lost Appalachian Trail.
Before Zach lets you go, we have our peak performance question presented by Topo Athletic. Use code TrekWinter15 at topoathletic.com. What is your top performance enhancing or backpacking hack?
Well, I would say my top enhancing hack is, the foam sleeping pads, the ones that like the crates, the egg crate ones. Mm-hmm. I have the little, 18 by 18 one. I can't live without that because, you sit on a picnic bench after walking all day. They're hard. Yeah. And that thing is perfect for sitting on or sitting on a rock. And I'm a side sleeper. And so I put it right under where my hip bones would be when I'm on my side because I have a sleeping pad. But to have that little extra bit of pad, that's the piece of gear I won't give up.
Perfect answer. I love that. Mills, thank you so much for joining us here.
Thanks so much for having me. It's really a thrill.
Appreciate it. To the Trek propaganda portion of today's show, John just gave us some snakes. Thanks for the snakes, Johns.
You're welcome.
This one is actually no, the trail won't always be there. Why you should thru-hike now by Claire Dumont, future Backpacker Radio guest. Claire pushes back on the classic thru-hiker reassurance that you can always do it next year. Floods, fires, Hurricane Helene, COVID, and increasingly aggressive political climate have all taken real bites out of the trails we love, and she argues that the vision of the trail you're dreaming of may look very different by the time you finally lace up. It's a good gut check for anyone in perpetual planning mode. Of course, head to the link in our show notes to get the full rundown here. And this is, I've seen this play out in my lifetime. The fires on the PCT for the first 7 years that I was really ingrained in the world of thru hiking were not really a thing. And since 2017, it seems like if you don't get fires, you're incredibly lucky. So yeah, who knows what conditions on which trails will hold what.
Yeah, Mills wrote an entire book we talked about on this episode about how they rerouted a huge chunk of the trail in Virginia, and no one hikes that old part anymore. So who knows when what's there now will possibly be rerouted later.
Yeah.
Even.
And Skirka stopped doing guiding trips in certain parts of the country just because of how unreliable it was with the consistent fires. So just proof that we don't know what's going to go down.
Yeah, fun things don't always stay fun.
Shit be wilding out. We ruin everything. Okay. Today's question of the day. This might be the shortest question of the day of all time.
I don't know.
Does it smell like fire? There's always weird smells.
It does smell like fire.
Wafting into this.
This is a quick fire smell. Usually it takes longer to smell like fire.
Maybe this is how we celebrate the 10-year anniversaries where we burn to death.
Die.
That'd be a really fitting ending.
Yeah, we did recently talk about maybe moving somewhere with windows. That would be funny.
Yeah.
If the reason we didn't make it was because we were in a room with no windows.
I have recently started scoping out new studio office space, but turns out we have a really good deal here.
You didn't know that?
Well, I mean, I knew that, but I didn't know how good of a deal we had. It's office space is not cheap.
No.
Though I think if we wait 5 years, because apparently everyone's getting replaced by AI and office space is no longer needed, maybe the cost will come down a little bit.
I think in a way we are robbing the bank that is next door to us.
Technically, we are.
Because on rent, we're not paying a fair price.
Yeah. Actually, I don't even know, if the place that I lease this from owns this part of it. I don't know. I think the bank owns everything.
They usually do.
Yeah.
Anyway, so if we don't finish this segment, we're dead.
Yeah.
Yes, it could go fast. I don't know. I have a lot of thoughts. Fuck, marry, kill. Rain, wind, snow. I'll let you go first because it seems like you have a quick answer.
This is tough. I will marry snow. I think that one's easy. Ooh, I don't like either of my options here. Based on the amount of shit I've talked, I think I have to kill wind, which I guess I'm fucking rain.
My problem is these are all kind words. I'm thinking about them in their if they were Pokemon, what's their furthest evolution form?
Blizzard, I'm monsoon, and tornado.
Avalanche, tornado, hurricane, monsoon.
I think
floods.
I think all of them are kill, but you are the prey.
Yeah, so I don't know which one I would like to like. When they get angry, I don't want to be married to them. Snow is the most marriage worthy, but it's cold. Rain on a nice summer day I like.
But rain can also be the coldest.
Rain can also be scary. No, because if rain gets too cold, then it's snow.
Well, so
unless it gets too cold.
I've heard Skirka say this, that like he has done plenty of backpacking in Alaska, and like it gets down to like negative 20 degrees, and like the high will be 0 degrees. He says by far and away the coldest experiences he's ever had is like when it's like 35 to 37 and raining. Like that's way colder than.
If I'm thinking about wind as like a cute little spring breeze, I feel really bad killing that, because that I could spend my life with. However, there's too many ways that you cannot be that. So I'm going to kill wind because I don't want tree branches blown on me, or I don't like tornadoes.
Yeah, tornadoes are scary.
So but I'm also heartbroken because I like the little breeze. Snow, I will marry. In the cutesy Christmas I'm indoors form.
We have the same answers.
Yeah, but mine take me a lot more effort to give.
No, that you have to think through
quick.
It. Yeah.
Mine, I'm still not sure if I'm right, because I don't like snow. Why would I marry it? I don't like the cold.
Yeah, I agree with you. I like snowboarding, and that's about where my love affair with the snow ends. But
I would marry cute picnic blanket wind.
I would still rather hike in snowy conditions than like cold, rainy conditions, if I can add that caveat.
Yeah, but I would prefer to hike in just some wind. Some wind.
Yeah, but like being in a forest snowshoeing through some snow is actually magical. I've never experienced where it's like 40-mile-an-hour gusts where I'm having a good time.
I just can't in good conscience be like, yeah, I think snow's great hiking conditions. I skipped the Sierra, Talk about
it wasn't necessarily the snow. It was the creek crossing, so the water, the Whas.
That's true. I mean, none of it seemed fun, but that is true.
It was the melted version of snow.
It's rain.
Yeah, the rain in these little ditches.
Okay.
Nice. I'm going to do an impromptu reminder / Trek propaganda. Is we're doing a video series with Andrew Skirka. That's why that was fresh in my mind. It was him talking. We're doing a series of videos. One of them is about just how to best manage environmental challenges, and he was talking about his experience backpacking in Alaska versus like cold rain. So that's why it was top of mind. But the Treks YouTube, check it out. I think this will probably, the first videos will probably be coming out around this episode. Okay.
This one's easy.
Was this one spurred by the last Triple Crown that we did?
What was the last Triple Crown we did?
Yeah, good point. Yeah, this is why neither of us could be Mills Kelly.
I don't have the skill.
Yeah, all right.
I think something prompted it.
We were talking
You
about...
didn't like mashed potatoes.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, because we were talking about shepherd's pie.
Yes.
Because we were talking about Triple Crown of pies.
Right.
That was not the last one.
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe I could be Mills Kelly.
I'm also going to do an impromptu call for listeners. Submit your Triple Crown suggestions, because we're having to get creative. We've done now how many Triple Crowns? I don't think we've done them for every episode, but almost every episode.
Yeah, I'd say roughly 330.
Yeah. I'm proud of the fact that we're still digging these up, but a little listener support on these would be appreciated.
Yeah. On that note, what's today's Triple Crown?
Yeah. This is the Triple Crown of potato foods. This is good. I actually like this.
Yeah, I do too.
Okay. Do you want to go first?
Sure.
You're going to take mine. I'm going to be pissed.
No, because you don't even like mashed potatoes. I'm not going to go with what you think I'm going to go with. Actually, I know what I'm going to go with. My number one, if I could only have one on this list forever, gnocchi.
I do have it on my list.
No way.
It's not top 3, but it's on there.
Oh my god, it's so delicious.
It is really delicious.
It's good.
But I'm disappointed in you as an Italian, because I believe it's pronounced gnocchi.
Everyone corrects me. I don't care. Again, let me quote me 5 minutes ago. Give me a word and watch me butcher the pronunciation.
We're both good at that, so I'm not better than you. I'm worse. I'm significantly worse. So that's when you get a word wrong, I get to do the
yes.
I get to showboat. Gnocchi is a great choice, though.
Yes.
It is, and it's gluten-free because it's potato.
Well, it's potato and flour.
Shit.
So.
Fuck.
There's that.
It's gluten-free when you use gluten-free flour.
Yeah, when you just do potato.
Yeah. All right. I've never made it before. I've eaten a lot of it.
It's delightful.
My first pick, and I thought for sure you were going to nab this as 1-1, tater tots.
They are on my list.
Yeah.
Yep, they're great.
Anytime it's a side option, I won't list them all because some of the other ones are still hanging out, but it's like I don't even think about it.
Mm-hmm.
The only one that I do think about is probably going to be my next choice, and I'll go granular here to leave some options for you, is waffle fries.
Ooh.
The best of the French fry is the waffle fry. The grid pattern, you can absorb the most amount of ketchup, mayo, barbecue, whatever you're going for.
Yeah. You could just have fries. I don't think taking two fries would be lazy.
Well,
obviously waffle is one of the best of the fry types, followed by curly.
We could do, yeah.
We could do triple crown of French fries.
We
really
could do the triple crown of French fries. We would be scraping the bottom of the barrel, but you're right. Okay, tots and fries.
Yeah.
Basic bitch foods, but if I'm being honest, those are my options.
Those are great. Those are great options. I would not have probably put regular French fries on my list, but I would.
Bless you.
Honorable mention.
Best
waffle fries.
Fast food French fry.
McDonald's. No. That's just of like the low level fast foods. I like Five Guys Cajun fries.
That's a good one.
That one is very nice.
That's really good. I know this is real dirtbag food, but Arby's has got a really good fry.
I've never eaten at an Arby's. I oftentimes wonder who eats at Arby's.
I don't even know if Arby's still exists. It's been a long time, but they've got the curly Cajun fries.
Interesting.
It's really good. All right, your next pick.
My next pick, it's technically two, but I'm going to use it as one. Hash browns.
Yeah.
/
high on my list.
breakfast potatoes.
Well,
sometimes they hash them. Sometimes they
you
toss them in peppers and onions as little cubes.
That's still hash browns. Oh,
Yeah,
it's little
but-
cubes. That's
yeah.
that's a different potato entirely.
But the restaurant menus always say hash browns, and it's both. They write it for both.
Okay.
So I think
We're gonna have to
counts as
fact check
one.
that one.
What would you call them?
Home fries, but that's
Those I thought were like the really like the
they're
sliced carrot ones.
They're typically longer. You're right, but I don't think that's like a hash brown is like very specifically like a strandy thin shred of potato that is just like all grease.
Or a patty. Hash brown patty.
True. Okay.
There's various forms, just like French fries.
You're right.
There are various forms of the hash brown.
You're right.
So I take that one.
The McDonald's hash brown patty is really good.
Yeah. Or if you're ever passing through Nanuet or Pearl River in New York, go to Zimmy's and get a plain flagel, which is a flattened bagel with egg, cheese, hash brown, and hot sauce. They use the hash brown patty. Oh my God, it's delicious.
I would be 400 pounds if I lived in New York just because of the breakfast sandwich game is very strong.
I was not thin.
Yeah.
And I don't regret it. It was delightful.
I hope
my God, it was so
GLP-1s
yummy.
don't ruin good food. Like, is good food going to go out of business because no one's eating anymore?
No, because you would still crave that taste, wouldn't you?
I don't know.
I don't know if I could get rid of the want for that. I can't think of that and not find it appealing.
Yeah. Is your friend group all on GLP-1s?
No, my friend group's just all skinny normally. They're all on Pilates.
Yeah, it's infiltrated my world.
Has it?
Big time.
Really?
Big, like, yeah. Every day I learn a new person who's on a GLP. Like, more power to you. Being healthy is good. But like, yeah, it's everywhere.
No, hasn't. My problem is they all work out too much in the mornings, and I can't wake up for that.
Yeah.
So
Mornings are so early.
yeah, it's to work out
Yeah.
too. Come on. Anyway.
My last one.
No,
Did you two?
I get one
Okay, you're
more.
right.
And you're not going to take it because you're psychotic, but mashed potatoes, duh, they're obviously amazing. Garlic, butter, mashed potato, little chives, who knows? They are delightful. I love them so much. Gravy on mashed potatoes, I could eat it as a meal. Just that. Garlic mashed potatoes of any variety, not dry mashed potatoes.
I literally never order. When it's a side option, it's almost always my last choice.
Insane.
I'll take the greens. I'll take like the collard greens. I'll take anything above mashed potatoes. Yeah. I'll even a baked potato is way better than a mashed potato for me.
No.
Yeah.
It's wrong. Wrong answer.
All right, my last pick. I will have a couple of honorable mentions. I got to go. This is kind of similar to a hash brown, I guess, but a latke.
Ooh, I love a latke with
Latke
applesauce.
It's so good.
Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah, Jenna makes a really good latke. We only have it during the holiday season, and like, fuck yeah, I can't stop eating them.
I had some friends growing up that were Jewish, and I lived for the invitations, to the holidays, because I wanted latkes.
Yeah.
That and the matzo ball soup, it just drown me in it.
Yeah.
Honorable mentions, potato wedges.
Ooh.
The ones that are like orange, they look like orange slices.
Yeah.
But they're potato.
Yeah.
Those
like
are
a bigger fry, essentially.
Yeah, it's better than French fries.
I like a more crisp to potato ratio, but I don't hate on that opinion. This one is probably the potato that I've consumed the most of in my life. Chips.
Ooh.
Potato, like
How could I forget about chips?
You put a bag of potato Lays in front of me. There's nothing exciting about it. Even if just the plain Lays, I'll eat the entire bag every single time.
Interesting.
They're perfect.
For me, pierogies.
Great choice.
Pierogies are just very nice foods.
Not on my list, but a heavy overlook. This one's stretching a little bit. Poutine.
No, that's French fries.
I mean, it's French fries. There's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot of other stuff happening there.
Smothered burrito is still a burrito.
True. Yeah, poutine fucks very hard.
Yeah. I'm not a fan of the ones that like they slice and then they like put it around like the top of like a casserole.
I don't know if I've had that.
They just look like little slices.
Yeah.
All in like a little circle. They're never crispy enough.
And I need a French fry.
I don't like the texture of them in my mouth.
Yeah.
There's not really a lot of potatoes I don't like, so I think they're all.
How you feel about sweet potato fries?
Oh my God, yum.
Yeah. Same.
Yes.
Yeah, sweet potato.
I love a sweet potato. I'll take a baked sweet potato over a baked potato. Yes, I will.
I think the accoutrements work better with the regular baked potato because the sweet potato's got a stronger flavor. I think sweet potato does well with like sweet foods. Like I like it during Thanksgiving because it's got like marshmallow and brown sugar and all that stuff. But I don't hate on that.
Have you only had it with the brown sugar though? Because sweet potato with salt and melted butter, it functions the same.
Yeah, I'll have to give it a shot. I don't know if I've had it.
It's good.
And sweet potato is like one of the healthiest things you can eat.
The only thing is when you eat it in baked potato form, it is a little stringier of a forking.
And you have to cook it for way longer. Those are dense motherfuckers. Good. We did it.
Potatoes.
Mailbag.
First message from Carl. I mentioned this the other day. I hope I can save you from the heartbreak regarding lobster bisque. Bisques are pureed, so no chunks that you are looking for. Order a lobster stew or chowder instead, as those will have what you're looking for. From Carl Lobster Hood.
Lobster facts.
This was actually very helpful for me because I read it when you emailed it prior to today. Last week we went out to a couple of restaurants for Restaurant Week, and I was looking at the appetizer list, and one of them had a lobster bisque. I love lobster chunky soup, and I thought I'm going to get that. And then that message popped in my head, and I was like, shit, was it a bisque that had the chunks or didn't have the chunks? And I remember him mentioning instead like a chowder.
Yeah.
And so I didn't get it, and I felt really smart.
Good.
So thanks.
Of the Denver restaurants that you went to, which was the best?
Jack's on Pearl.
That's the steakhouse.
Yes, because there's I don't know if it's still on Pearl or if it ever was, but there's Jack's with an X, and that's like a seafood place. Jack's, Jacks, is a steakhouse, and they had just these fat fillets that we got, and they had prosciutto mac and cheese. And so my plate was filet, prosciutto mac and cheese, mashed potato. I believe it was a garlic mashed potato. And those bites were so good.
Looks like they got some bone marrow. Bone marrow's good.
They were really yummy. I was very full. I'm still very full. Anyway, Carl wrote to us again. Hey, Cinnamon Pals. I worked for a number of years in the restaurant industry, and I hope to reassure you about the worries Zach had about sushi fish being certified.
This one popped up, I think, on an episode that you were not on, and it's funny how much this theme has come back, because apparently my fear is so triggering for people that we've been corrected a lot. But I love it. I love it. I love it.
The people responsible for food safety are the local health departments, and they are very particular about issuing permits to anyone serving sushi and other raw items. They are also subject to more frequent inspections. On the subject of permits, they must prove they only source from approved vendors who can document every step the fish took. Fish don't have feet in the supply chain. They have to be able to produce those records at the restaurant upon demand by the inspectors. Even minor violations could be a full shutdown event. Hot tip for any new restaurant you try. Before you order, go to the bathroom and wash your hands. No hot water or no soap in the bathroom. That means the staff doesn't have adequate facilities to wash their hands after pooping, so you should take that opportunity to run. If the bathroom isn't well kept, that's a no-go for me as well. If the dirtiest room in the place is disgusting, you can bet the kitchen ain't great either. If the bathroom is nice, you're in the right spot. From Carl Lobster Hood. That's a great tip.
Yeah. That is a great tip. I'm curious. Lobster, write in and give us your background. I'm curious. Did he say? Oh, he worked in the restaurant industry for a number of years. Okay. Never mind. Yeah, I mentioned previously how I saw one video of a guy who was about to smoke some salmon, and he put some rub on it, and so like there was a 10-minute period between.
Did the parasites crawl out?
The little worms like dancing out.
I saw a photo of this last night, and I thought I'm never gonna eat sushi again.
Yeah, I mean, to Carl's point here, that's not sushi grade fish. So what he's saying, and I'm sure is correct, is that like sushi grade fish is not gonna have that problem. But just the image of that was enough to. I've since had sushi a couple of times, but it goes through my mind every single time.
Yeah, I don't like that. I like sushi. Don't ruin it. Oh my god.
Yeah.
I saw that photo last night, and I really didn't like it, and I forgot about it.
No, there's a video. It's even worse. You
no,
can
don't.
See
I don't want
to watch dancing. No. I tried to show Jess, and she refused. She's like, "I'm gonna leave the office if you do this."
Yeah, I'm with Jess on this one.
Yeah. We don't have a new 5-star review. So you guys, if you're listening to this, you enjoy the podcast. If you have iOS, please head on over to Apple, leave us any number of stars.
Just not 1, 2, 3, or 4. Especially if you're a new listener and you like the show and you're like, wow, I wish I was here from the very beginning, but I'm so glad I found it now. Stop in and introduce yourself if you have 5-star review, because the people who have been here the whole time probably they've been hearing this for like 9 years. They've left one. Yeah. Right? We need you now.
Yeah, we need you right now.
Right now, this second.
And we'll read anything.
Yeah.
You can say whatever you want.
Anything. As long as it's 5 stars and not 4, 3, 2, or 1, you can the floor is yours. Yeah. What do you want to talk about?
Just don't say anything mean about a guest.
Yeah.
That's our line.
But that leaves a lot left.
Yeah.
That's a very loose rein you have there.
Basically the whole world minus one fleck of dust.
Right. It could be like Snake Island, right? But you could be telling me a story about something else.
There it is.
So.
Thank you so much to today's title sponsor, that is Topo Athletic. These trail runners are amazing. I've used them on every hike that I've done over the last couple of years. They've held up great. You can take them out of the box. They're comfortable on day one. The uppers last forever. Frankly, I got rid of mine before the uppers even showed any like considerable wear or tear, mostly just because I have old knees, and once the midsole's not as cushy as it can be, I'm going to be a snob and get a new pair. But yeah, Topo Athletic are great. They're making huge strides in the thru-hiking world. And you can save 15% by using our code TREKWINTER15 at checkout.
Yep. Going to the Red River Gorge this weekend. I've got them next to my suitcase and ready to go.
Hell yeah.
That is my outdoor shoe of choice.
Are you doing any backpacking?
I heard that we are going to be going on a hike on Sunday. It doesn't matter. I mean, I'm not gonna change the plans. It's someone else's birthday.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm just showing up.
I'm not ridiculous.
But I'm gonna have my shoes because I heard the word hike happen, and so.
Be like, funny you mentioned that, guys. I have a podcast.
Yeah.
That talks about poop.
Do you guys want to hear about it? How many hours do you have?
Super big thank you to our Chuck Norris Award winners on Patreon. That is Alex and Misty with Navigators Crafting, Alex Kendall, Andrew, Austin McDaniel, Bill Jensen, Brad and Blair from 13 Adventures, Brent Mullins, a.k.a. Cruzy, Brian Alsop,
Fables,
Carl Lobster Hood, the man of the hour, Christopher Marshburn, Clint Sittler, Coach for Marine Outdoors, Eric Casper,
Friendly Ghost,
Eric Hoffman, Ethan Harwell Dunn, Jillian Daniels, Greg Knight, Greg Martin, Griffin Haywood, You Bring Me a Beer, Haley Buckingham,
Palace,
Jackson Storm,
Trooper,
Jason Kaiser, Luke Netjes, Maddie in Arizona, Patrick C. in Seattle, Randy Sutherland, Rebecca Braveheart, Rural Juror, Sawyer Products, the St. Louis Shaman, Timothy Hahn,
Solo.
and Tracy Trigger. You can... Oh, thanks to our guy Paulie at Old Man Murph's Coffee Roasters. Go to ommcr.com. Get yourself some delicious beans. You can follow us on social at Backpacker Radio on Instagram, TikTok, and Threads. Threads is a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Do you thread?
No. It's the same thing as TikTok. Like, if I write anything down that's like a random thought I have, the last thing I want to do is blast it to the internet. I'm going to read that a week later and be like, what an idiot.
I used to do that a lot when I was drunk before I had a podcast era.
Sounds like
All
a
my dirty
nightmare.
thoughts. Yeah, no. Well, I mean, I'm doing way worse now.
Yeah, but you have to actually like listen to a lot of stuff to get to the one thing I'd cringe that I said in an episode.
We do tend to bury the chaotic shit at like hour 3.5 on a podcast.
Right.
Where only the most loyal troopers are going to be consuming.
And if I can go 4 hours and cringe twice, like that's still a pretty good ratio
For
versus
sure.
being one sentence, one cringe. Ugh.
Yeah. Subscribe and follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Oh, wait, you have to plug your social media.
Yes, I have to.
You do.
I need to. Follow me on Instagram. It's Juliana_Chauncey, and on YouTube, I'm Juliana Chauncey, and you can get my book, Hiking from Home, a long-distance hiking guide for family and friends on Amazon. Thanks.
Appalachian Trails and Pacific Crest Trails are my books. Chauncey and I would be very appreciative of a review.
Yep.
Follow us on YouTube.
Hi, Internet.
What's up, YouTube? That's it. Thank you so much for listening, and happy hiking.
Bye.